What's up everyone? You're here at No Harry, we're dropping something epic today. What if Lily's portrait whispered the truth to Harry and he realized Dumbledore raised him to die? Like and subscribe if you enjoy. Let's get started. Chapter 1, The Portrait Speaks. The house at Grimmauld Place had a particular kind of silence that got under your skin. It wasn't peaceful quiet. It was the quiet of held breath, of things unsaid, of rooms that remembered too much and forgot nothing. Every creak of the floorboards felt like an accusation. Every shadow in the corner seemed to lean slightly inward, as though the house itself was listening to whatever you were thinking. Harry had been here for 3 weeks since the end of term, and he still hadn't gotten used to it. He slept badly, which wasn't new. He ate mechanically, which also wasn't new. He sat through order meetings where adults spoke over him and around him and occasionally about him as though he were a piece of furniture that had inconveniently developed feelings, and he said nothing, because saying nothing had become something of a specialty. Mrs. Weasley fussed. Lupin looked at him with those careful, grief-soaked eyes. Moody watched him like a chess piece he wasn't sure belonged on the board. And Dumbledore, when Dumbledore came, which wasn't often, spoke to Harry with that particular brand of gentle authority that was somehow worse than anything else, because it felt like being held and managed at the same time, and Harry could never quite tell where one ended and the other began. Sirius had been dead for 3 weeks. Harry didn't let himself think about that too directly. When he did, it came in sideways, the flash of movement through a veil, the sound that wasn't quite a scream, the horrible stillness of the room in the Department of Mysteries afterward. He'd started avoiding the room on the 2nd floor where Sirius used to sleep. He'd started avoiding his own reflection because sometimes, in the wrong light, he looked like James Potter, and he couldn't deal with that right now either. Tonight was Thursday. It was past 2 in the morning. Harry was wandering. This was also new, or not new, exactly, but more frequent. He'd taken to walking the house at night when sleep wouldn't come, which was most nights. He knew the layout well enough now that he didn't need a light, just navigating by memory and the faint gray leak of moonlight through the narrow windows. Past the kitchen. Past the drawing room with its locked cabinet that he'd never been able to open. Down toward the back of the house, where the rooms got smaller and more neglected, where the order members never seemed to go because there was no practical reason to. He wasn't looking for anything. He wasn't looking for anything because looking implied he expected to find something, and Harry had learned this summer that expectations were just disappointments lined up in a row. He pushed open a door near the end of the corridor on the 2nd floor, a door he was fairly certain he'd never opened before, not in all the weeks he'd been here. It stuck slightly, the wood swollen with old damp, and he had to lean his shoulder into it. The room on the other side was small and entirely empty except for dust, a narrow window, and a portrait on the far wall. Harry stood in the doorway for a moment. The moonlight came through the window at an angle that fell directly across the portrait, which struck him as strange, purposeful, almost, like the house had arranged it. He knew Grimmauld Place well enough by now to understand that it did things like that sometimes. It was that kind of house. The portrait showed a woman. She was young, mid-20s, maybe, though portraits had a way of being ageless. She had dark red hair pulled loosely over one shoulder, and her eyes were, Harry's breath caught. Her eyes were his eyes. Not the shape exactly, but the color, that particular shade of green that he'd been told about his whole life and seen in mirrors his whole life and somehow never felt the weight of until right now, looking at it from the outside. He knew who this was before the portrait moved. "Harry," Lily Potter said. Her voice was soft. It wasn't what he expected, he'd somehow imagined something more like bells or light, the voice of a woman who'd become more legend than person. But she sounded like someone's mum. She sounded tired and fond and careful, in the way of someone who had been waiting a very long time to say something difficult. Harry couldn't move for a moment. He stood in the doorway with his hand still on the frame and his heart doing something complicated and seismic in his chest. "Mum," he said. The word came out rough, like it hadn't been used in a long time. Lily's portrait smiled, and it was the saddest smile he'd ever seen on anyone's face. I wondered if you'd find this room eventually. I hoped you would. It had to be you on your own, no one could bring you here. She paused. Come in, sweetheart. Close the door. He obeyed without thinking about it, the way you obeyed something that lived at the very core of you. He crossed the room, sat down on the dusty floor in the moonlight because there was no furniture, and looked up at her. You can talk, he said. Which was a spectacularly stupid thing to say, but his brain was running at about 30%. I always could, Lily said. Portraits can't remember everything, I'm sure you know that, you've spoken to enough of them. But I was given a little more than most. Your grandfather Fleamont commissioned it, after, she stopped. After I died. He wanted something of me left behind. He hid it here because he thought it would be safest, further from Dumbledore's reach. Something in Harry sharpened at that, barely perceptibly. Further from Dumbledore's reach, he repeated. Lily's green eyes, his eyes, held his steadily. Yes. Why? She didn't answer immediately. She looked at him for a long moment, and he had the peculiar sensation of being truly seen, not managed, not assessed for usefulness or threat level, but seen, the way only a few people in his life had ever made him feel. How much do you know, she said finally, about why Voldemort came for us the night he killed your father and me? Harry blinked. Of all the ways he'd imagined this conversation going, and he hadn't imagined it at all, because you couldn't prepare for something like this, that wasn't the opening he'd expected. The prophecy, he said. Dumbledore told me at the end of last year. The one Trelawney made. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, yes. Lily's voice was careful. That prophecy. Do you remember the full text? He did. He'd spent enough sleepless nights running it through his head. Born as the 7th month dies, and the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not, and either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. He stopped. Dumbledore said it could have applied to Neville too, but Voldemort chose me when he chose to attack our family. Lily nodded slowly. Dumbledore told you that either must die at the hand of the other. That one of you must kill the other for it to end. Right. And what did Dumbledore tell you that means for you, specifically? What did he tell you is the only way it can end? Harry opened his mouth, and closed it again. Because now that she was asking him to examine it directly, to pull it out of the tangle of grief and guilt and exhaustion it had been buried in since the Department of Mysteries, he thought about the way Dumbledore had said it, the very specific words, the careful framing. You must be the one to kill him, Harry. But also, there are things I must tell you, when the time is right. Things about the nature of this connection between you and Tom. Things about what must ultimately happen for this to end. When the time is right. He said there's more, Harry said slowly. That he'd tell me the rest when he decided you were ready, Lily finished, and there was something in her tone now. Not quite anger. Anger had heat in it. This was something colder than anger, something that had had years to settle and condense. When he decided the moment was right. His moment. His timing. His decision about what you need to know and when. She paused. Ask yourself, Harry, what kind of person controls the flow of information to a child about their own destiny? What is that, strategically? The word strategically hit him like cold water. He's protecting me, Harry said, but it came out less certain than he meant it to. Like a reflex, reaching for the familiar explanation. Is he? Lily said. Very quietly. Or is he protecting the plan? The moonlight shifted slightly as a cloud moved outside. The room felt different suddenly, smaller, or maybe not smaller, maybe just more weighted. What plan? Harry said. Lily looked at him, and he could see something behind her eyes, the portrait's equivalent of the way people look when they're about to say something that will change everything and they're trying, at the last second, to find another way. But there wasn't another way. There was only the truth. Sit with this, she said. Don't react until I've finished. She waited for his nod. The prophecy has a clause that Dumbledore has never told you. A clause that is the entire reason for everything, for the way he placed you with the Dursleys, for the way he's managed your education, for the way he's withheld information, kept you close but also kept you in the dark. The reason he's let you walk into danger repeatedly without adequate preparation. Her voice didn't waver, but it tightened, infinitesimally. There is a Horcrux in you, Harry. The word landed like a physical thing. Harry had heard it, in the library books Hermione had found, in the fragments of information about Voldemort's soul-splitting, but it had always been abstract, something Voldemort had done to objects, to other things. That night, Lily said, when the killing curse rebounded from you, it was because of my sacrifice, my love, the magic in it. But the curse didn't just fail. It shattered. And a fragment of Voldemort's soul, already so fractured and unstable from the murders he'd committed in making his other Horcruxes, a fragment of it latched onto the only living thing in that room. You. It lives in you, Harry. It has lived in you since you were 15 months old. He was very still. Dumbledore knows, Harry said. It wasn't a question. The moment the words formed, he knew with absolute certainty that they were true. He's known for years, Lily said. He's been hunting the other Horcruxes, the diary, the ring, the locket, the cup, the diadem, the snake, because he knows they need to be destroyed before Voldemort can be truly killed. But the last one, Harry. The one that lives in you. She stopped. You can't be surgically removed from it. Not with any magic Dumbledore knows. You are the Horcrux. You and it have grown together since you were barely more than a baby. Her voice cracked for the first time, just slightly, at the edges. The only way to destroy it is to let Voldemort kill you. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Harry had ever heard. He didn't explode. He didn't sob. He just sat there in the moonlight on the dusty floor while the shape of his entire life rearranged itself into something he recognized with horrible clarity. All the pieces that had never quite fit. The scar that burned like a nerve ending wired to the wrong part of the world. The way Dumbledore always managed to be one step removed from the worst moments, never quite there, always with an explanation after the fact. The way certain things about his training had always felt like they were building towards something specific, something with a particular endpoint in mind. There are things I must tell you, when the time is right. When it was time for Harry to die. He was going to wait, Harry said. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. Until Voldemort had enough power to kill me properly. And then he was going to, walk me to the door. Tell me it was the only way. Lily's expression was devastating. Yes. And I'd accept it, Harry said, very quietly. Because he's Dumbledore. Because I trust him. Because he's been building that trust for 5 years, piece by piece, and of course I'd believe him, of course I'd think if Dumbledore says it's the only way then it's the only way. He broke off. His hands were pressing flat against the floor, not to steady himself, just to feel something solid. He raised me to die. The words sat in the air between them. Lily didn't contradict him. She didn't offer a softer version. She just watched him with those green eyes that were his eyes and waited, because she understood that some truths needed to be said out loud before they were real enough to fight. How do you know all this? Harry asked. I don't know all of it from certainty, Lily said. I'm a portrait. I have memory up to the point of my death, and I have what your grandfather's portrait makers were able to weave into me, some capacity to observe and reason beyond that, a kind of living intelligence that's unusual in portrait work. Your grandfather paid extraordinarily for it. A ghost of something, pride, or humor, moved across her painted face. But mostly I know because I was an extraordinarily gifted witch, Harry, and I understood Albus Dumbledore better than he ever realized. I knew how he thought. I saw how he worked. He was already managing the situation when I was alive, already making decisions about you that were his to make, he thought, because the stakes were so high. The cold in her voice had become absolute zero by now. I died not knowing about the Horcrux. But I suspected there was something he wasn't telling your father and me. I suspected he was holding something in reserve. And my dad. Lily's face softened with grief, a true grief, raw even 15 years later. James trusted him completely. Right to the end. She paused. Don't make that mistake, Harry. The mistake of trusting completely. Trust people for specific things, for what they've demonstrated, but never hand anyone the keys to your own judgment. Harry looked at her for a long time. There was so much he wanted to say, or maybe it wasn't words he wanted but something more like the simple, staggering reality of sitting in a room with his mother's face, with her voice, with the intelligence and sharpness in her eyes that he recognized because he'd seen it in the mirror his entire life without knowing what he was looking at. Tell me about the Horcrux, he said. Tell me everything you know. Or suspect. Lily nodded, settling into it, leaning slightly forward in the portrait's shallow frame as though proximity could help. A Horcrux is a piece of soul anchored to an object, or, in your case, a person. As long as it exists, Voldemort cannot truly die. He will always be able to come back, in some form. When his body was destroyed the first time, in your nursery, it was because the killing curse rebounded, but he'd already secured his survival through the Horcruxes. He still had anchors in the world. But if you destroy all the anchors, Harry said, his mind moving quickly now, that particular quality of thought he sometimes felt during chess or in the middle of a Quidditch match where everything slowed down and clarified, then there's nothing left to pull him back. So the question isn't whether I have to die, the question is whether destroying the piece of his soul inside me requires my death. Whether there's another way. Lily blinked. And then, slowly, she smiled, not the sad smile, a different one, brighter and fiercer and so startlingly, achingly familiar from the mirror all his life. That, she said, is exactly the right question. Dumbledore decided it couldn't be done without my death, Harry said. But how much time did he spend actually looking for another way? Why would he? The outcome he needed, me dying in front of Voldemort at the right moment, requires that there's no other way. So why would he go looking for one? He wouldn't, Lily said. He's brilliant, Harry. One of the greatest magical minds alive. But brilliance in service of a predetermined conclusion is still just confirmation bias. She held his gaze. And I spent 15 years as a portrait in this house, with access to the Black family library, which is extensive and extremely dark, thinking about nothing except this problem. I've had somewhat more motivation to find another answer. Harry's breath came out sharp. And? There are possibilities, Lily said carefully. They're not proven. They're not safe, in any conventional sense. And they would require you to become a significantly more accomplished wizard than you currently are. She tilted her head. Not because you're not talented. You're remarkable, actually, and I'm not saying that because I'm your mother, though I am saying it partly for that reason. But your education has been carefully managed to keep you capable without making you exceptional. There's a difference between those two things. The implication of that landed on Harry with a thud. He's been limiting my education. He hasn't had to do it directly. He put you in a school where the defense against the dark arts position changes every year, where your best teachers have either been imposters or have had to leave under suspicious circumstances. He ensured you'd have love in your life and loyalty around you and a strong moral compass, all genuinely good things, things he may have actually wanted for you. I don't think he's purely cynical, but also just enough knowledge to be useful and not quite enough to make you unmanageable. Lily's voice was absolutely level. You could have been so much further along. You have a gift for magic that is, it's innate, Harry, it's in your blood and in something deeper than blood, something about the way you're constituted. Under different circumstances, with different instruction, stop. Harry held up a hand, not rudely, but because he needed a moment. He sat with it. Let it crystallize. The summer between 4th and 5th year, Dumbledore had given him nothing. Left him at the Dursleys with no contact, no training, no explanation, just isolation and silence while Voldemort consolidated power. Fifth year, with Umbridge in the castle and Dumbledore absent, Harry's magical education had basically stalled. He'd taught himself and his friends through the DA, and the results had been genuinely useful, but that had been despite the system, not because of it. He thought about the graveyard. He thought about the fact that at 14 years old, he'd faced Voldemort at full power with nothing but determination and a priori incantatem fluke to save him. He thought about how many times he'd been in situations that should have gotten him killed and hadn't, and whether that was luck or whether something else had been at work, whether Voldemort had been subtly, cosmically prevented from killing him too early because Harry needed to be alive and intact for the final sacrifice to mean something. He thought about the prophecy. He will have power the Dark Lord knows not. What's the power? Harry asked. The one Voldemort doesn't know. What is it? Lily was quiet for a beat. What do you think it is? Dumbledore told me it's love. Harry said it flatly, without inflection. Lily looked at him. And it's true, Harry said slowly, working through it in real time, but it's not the whole truth, is it? It's not just that love is a nice thing to have. There's something functional about it. Something that changes what magic can do. He paused. Voldemort doesn't understand it because he doesn't feel it, but that's not the same as it being a weakness. That's actually a capability gap on his side. Yes, Lily said, and her voice had something electric in it now, something intense. And that capability gap, if you understood it properly, if you understood what love actually does to magic at a structural level, not just philosophically, it would give you options that no one fighting Voldemort on purely technical terms would ever see. Your father was brilliant with charms and transfiguration. I don't say this modestly, the finest potions mind of my generation, and my specialty was the deep theory of magical mechanics. The why behind the how. The night I died, what I did was not a simple act of love and sacrifice. I made a specific, theoretically complex magical choice in the final moments, and it worked because I understood exactly what I was doing. She paused. You have the capacity to understand it too. Better than me, even, because you have both our gifts, and you've already been using this power your whole life without knowing what it is. Harry sat with that. He could feel something happening behind his sternum, not hope exactly, that was too soft a word for it. More like the sense of a locked door discovering it had been carrying the key inside it all along. If you're right about the Horcrux, he said, if there is a way to remove it without dying, it's going to require things that Dumbledore will never tell me, never point me toward, because he needs me not to find it. He needs me to reach the end of this without a solution so that the sacrifice looks like the only option. Yes. So I need to find it myself. Independently. Without the Order knowing what I'm doing. Yes. And I need to actually become what I could be, magically. Not what I've been allowed to become. Yes, Lily said. And Harry, there's something else you need to understand. Dumbledore is not your enemy. That's important. He's not Voldemort. He's not cruel. He is a man who has made a terrible, utilitarian calculation about the value of one life versus millions of others, and he's been living with that calculation for so long that it's become, just true to him. The way terrible things become true when you've sat with them long enough. Her voice was careful. That makes him more dangerous, in some ways. Because he'll be genuinely sad when you die. He'll grieve you. And he'll still let it happen, because he'll believe there was no other way. A pause. Because he never looked. Harry was on his feet. He didn't remember standing up, it had happened somewhere in the middle of that last sentence, his body having its own response to things before his mind caught up. He stood in the small, dusty room in the thin light of early morning, because morning was coming now, the darkness outside the window taking on a faint gray quality at its edges, and he felt like the walls of a room he'd been living in his whole life had simply ceased to be there. He wasn't angry. That was the thing that surprised him about himself. He'd expected anger, explosive, destructive, the kind of rage that had shattered Dumbledore's instruments that night at the end of fifth year. But this wasn't that. This was something colder and more durable. A kind of furious clarity that felt, paradoxically, like the steadiest he'd felt since Sirius fell through the veil. Because now he knew the actual shape of the problem. He'd been fighting blind for 5 years. He'd been handed fragments of the truth at strategic moments, just enough to move him in the right direction, toward the right ending, Dumbledore's ending. And he'd been doing it in good faith, because he trusted, because trusting Dumbledore felt as natural and automatic as breathing. But you could make yourself stop breathing, if you had to. How often can I come back? Harry asked. To talk to you. Whenever you want, Lily said. This room, Dumbledore doesn't know about it. He knows Grimmauld Place very well, but your grandfather Fleamont had this room hidden with very specific enchantments. It's not a Fidelius, it's something older than that. A family charm. It will only reveal itself to blood. She tilted her head. You could bring your friends. If you trust them. I trust 2 of them completely. Your grandfather trusted exactly 2 people completely as well, Lily said. He said 3 was a crowd, but 2 was a fortress. She paused. Don't go to them tonight. Let this settle in you first. You need to, not process it, exactly. You need to become it. Let it change you properly, not just inform you. There's a difference. Harry nodded slowly. And Harry? Her voice was softer now, the portrait mother quality of it coming back, the warmth underneath the steel. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for everything that was done to you, and for everything that wasn't done for you that should have been, and for the fact that I died and left you to be shaped by people who needed things from you instead of just. She stopped. Her painted face did something complicated. I would have given you every boring, ordinary, unmessy thing. Homework and Sunday dinners and arguments about tidying your room. I would have given you all of it. Harry stood there and let that land. He didn't try to deflect it or make it smaller than it was. He looked at his mother's face in the gray early light and let himself, for exactly 30 seconds, be a 16-year-old boy who had grown up without his mum and who felt that. Then he straightened his spine. Tell me about the theory, he said. The magical mechanics of love as a structural force. Tell me everything you know. Lily blinked, surprised, he thought, or as close to surprised as a portrait could get. Then she smiled, that bright fierce one, and leaned forward. Sit back down, she said. This is going to take a while. He sat. Outside, the grey dawn crept up behind the London rooftops and birds started, tentatively, to make noise. Inside the small, hidden room at the back of Grimmauld Place, Harry Potter's mother began to teach him the truth about the magic that had saved his life when he was 15 months old, and Harry listened with every cell in his body, not with the passive reception of a student who's been told what to pay attention to, but with the hungry, sharpened attention of a person who has just realized that the map they've been given is wrong and is making, with urgency and precision, a new one. She talked for 2 hours. About the mechanics of sacrificial magic, how a willing death made in love didn't just create a shield but wove itself into the magic of whoever it protected, creating something the old texts called an ancient compact, a binding between the living and the sacrifice that Voldemort's magic would always fracture against. About how this wasn't unique to Harry, there were other cases, historically, though none quite as concentrated, because the conditions of that night had been so specific and so extreme. About how the Horcrux inside him had been slowly, over 15 years, changing in response to that ancient compact, that it was not simply an inert piece of Voldemort's soul anymore but something stranger, something that had been in continuous contact with the most magically charged love protection in recorded history for 16 years. It's changing, Harry said slowly, somewhere around the second hour, as the implication of that settled. Yes, Lily said. And that's relevant to the question of whether you have to die. Because a Horcrux is stable when it's just sitting in an object. A locket doesn't feel anything. A diary doesn't grow. But one that's been living inside a person who's been, he stopped, working through it. It's been in contact with the protection magic since I was born. It's been soaking in it. You're extraordinarily quick, Lily said, and the pride in her voice was absolutely unconcealed. Would it respond differently to the protection magic than a normal Horcrux would? Harry said. Could you theoretically use the ancient compact against it? Use the same mechanism that deflected the killing curse to, I told you, Lily said quietly. I said you had both our gifts. Your father would have taken 3 more hours to get there. Harry almost laughed. He pressed his hand over his mouth for a moment, because it felt wrong to laugh in a room this full of everything he was feeling, but also it felt like the most honest thing his body had done in 3 weeks, so he let it out, a short, slightly ragged sound that was half laugh and half something else entirely. All right, he said, pulling himself together. All right. I need books. Specific books. The Black Library has what I need. Most of it. There are a few texts you'll need to source elsewhere, and I'll tell you what to look for. Lily paused. There's also someone who would know more than I do, if you can find a way to reach them without alerting the Order. Who? Nicholas Flamel, Lily said. He's dying, or he has been, since he and his wife chose to destroy the Philosopher's Stone. But he is the oldest living magical theorist in the world, and he has spent the better part of 6 centuries studying the intersection of soul magic and protective enchantments. She looked at Harry steadily. He also has a particular reason to want Dumbledore's plans to fail. Harry filed that away. He'd ask about it later, there was only so much revolutionary information he could hold in one sitting. Okay, he said. I start tonight. The library. Don't let anyone see what you're reading. Obviously. He stood up again, and this time it was purposeful, the motion of someone who has a direction now and is already pointed at it. He looked up at Lily's portrait. I'll come back tomorrow night. I'll be here, she said. I've been here a long time. I'm not going anywhere. He nodded, turned toward the door, and then stopped with his hand on the frame. He didn't look back, couldn't quite do it again, not right now, when he was holding himself together with the focused calm that required all of him. Thank you, he said. Harry. Her voice was very gentle. I need you to do something for me. What? When you feel the anger, Lily said, and you will, it'll come, don't let it be your only fuel. Anger burns fast and hot and it leaves you empty. What happened to you was an injustice. But your life is worth more than an injustice. So fight smart. Fight because you want to live, not just because you're furious. She paused. Promise me. He thought about that. Really sat with it for a moment, his back to her, his hand on the doorframe, the pale morning light turning everything soft and unreal. Yeah, he said. Okay. He walked out of the room and pulled the door quietly shut behind him. Down the corridor, back toward the rest of the house, which was still asleep and ordinary and completely unchanged, which was the strangest thing, because Harry felt like he'd walked out of one life and into a different one, and the fact that the floorboards still creaked in exactly the same places felt almost offensive. He went to his room. He sat on the edge of his bed. He did not sleep. He thought about Dumbledore, the half-moon glasses, the particular quality of his twinkle, the careful warmth of those meetings in his office where truths were dispensed in the exact amounts deemed appropriate. He thought about the Dursleys and 11 years of cupboards and mediocrity and invisibility, and how Dumbledore had placed him there specifically, had chosen that for him, had chosen a childhood that would make Harry humble and compliant and grateful for any kindness shown him. He thought about the word managed. He thought about Nicholas Flamel, and ancient compacts, and a piece of Voldemort's soul that had been soaking in love magic for 16 years and might have become something that the original maker had never intended or anticipated. He thought about his mother's face. Then he reached under the mattress for the small notebook he'd been using to write down things he needed to remember, Quidditch plays, mostly, because the mundane work of Quidditch had been the only thing keeping him even slightly functional this summer, and he turned to a clean page. He wrote 3 words at the top. "What I know." And then, below that, slowly and with great precision, he began to write everything. Chapter 2, Evidence and Fire. The Black family library was on the 3rd floor, behind a door that locked with a charm so old it predated the Ministry's standardization of magical security. Harry had found the right counter-charm on his 2nd night, a piece of wandless lateral thinking that had surprised even him, pressing his palm flat against the wood and pushing his magic through it like a key shaped from intent rather than incantation. The door had swung open with a sound like a satisfied exhale. Nobody else came up here. The Order used the kitchen and the drawing room and occasionally the dining room for meetings, but the upper floors of Grimmauld Place existed in a kind of domestic quarantine, too full of Black family artifacts and too unpredictable for casual traffic. Mrs. Weasley had made noises about clearing it out, but the summer had filled up with more urgent things, and the library had been left to its dust and its shadows and, now, to Harry. He worked through the first night after talking to Lily's portrait with systematic focus, moving along the shelves with a spell Hermione had once shown him, a cataloging charm that made the titles on the spines glow faintly in order of relevance to whatever subject you were researching. He'd adapted it slightly, so instead of a fixed subject it responded to a set of linked concepts: Horcruxes, soul magic, sacrificial enchantments, ancient compacts, the structural mechanics of protective magic. About a third of the books glowed. He pulled the most relevant-looking 15 and carried them to the heavy oak table at the room's center, and he read. Not the way he usually read, skimming for the relevant sentence, the key fact, the answer to tonight's specific problem, but properly, from the front, following the logic of each text with his full attention. Lily had said he needed to understand the why behind the how, and she was right, and it turned out that when you were reading to save your own life rather than to pass an exam, concentration came remarkably easily. By the 4th night he had filled 12 pages of his notebook and developed a specific, gnawing headache from the cramped print of the older texts and the smell of mildew that rose from their pages. He'd found references to something the pre-Merlin magical theorists called anima vinculum, soul bonds created not through deliberate ritual but through extreme emotional circumstances, particularly death. The theory was that when a soul left a body violently, under conditions of absolute love, it didn't simply dissipate, it impressed itself on whatever living thing was nearest, and the impression had structural weight. It changed the magical signature of the protected person at a fundamental level. Which meant Harry's magical signature had never been purely his own. Which meant, on some deep architectural level, a piece of his mother was still in him too. He sat with that for a long time one night, the library dark around him except for his wand light, and felt something shift in his chest, something that wasn't grief and wasn't relief but was somewhere in between, a complicated warmth. He was, in a strange and literal sense, not entirely alone. On the 5th day, Hermione arrived. He heard the commotion from upstairs, Mrs. Weasley's voice rising with welcome, Ginny shouting something about taking the good bedroom, Ron's particular thunder on the stairs. Harry closed his book and sat for a moment, adjusting his thinking. He'd known this was coming. He'd spent the last 5 days deciding what to say and how to say it, and he still wasn't entirely sure, because telling Hermione was the most important and most dangerous thing he was going to do in this period before he had enough of a plan to act on. He needed her. That was simple. He could do a lot of things on his own, but Hermione Granger's mind was not a resource he could replicate or replace, and he'd stopped pretending otherwise somewhere around 3rd year when she'd produced a time-turner from nowhere and retroactively saved 2 lives. The risk was that she'd tell someone. Not out of malice, out of that deep-seated instinct she had to involve authority, to trust the institutional structure, to believe that adults and rules and the proper channels were a safety net rather than the bars of a cage. He'd seen it work against her before. He needed to get to her before the instinct kicked in, before Grimmauld Place and its Order members and its reassuring domesticity of Mrs. Weasley's cooking and Ginny's laugh could settle her back into the sense that everything was being managed properly. He went downstairs. She was in the entrance hall, still in her traveling cloak, her bag making her list slightly to the right. She looked up when she heard him on the stairs and her face did that thing it did, that immediate sharpening, reading him before he'd said a word. You look terrible, she said. I need to talk to you, he said. Just you. Tonight, if possible. She looked at him for one beat longer, and the quality of her attention shifted into something more careful, more alert. She'd known him long enough to distinguish between his various flavors of troubled, and whatever she was reading on his face now was apparently a new one. Okay, she said. He waited until the house was quiet, late, well past midnight, the Weasleys and Lupin and the assorted order members that filtered through all settled into their rooms. He came to Hermione's door and knocked once, softly, and she opened it immediately, which meant she'd been sitting up waiting. She had her dressing gown on and her hair was doing extraordinary things in every direction, and she had a look on her face that said, I have been thinking about that expression you had on the stairs for 6 hours and I have a preliminary list of hypotheses. Come on, he said quietly, tilting his head toward the corridor. They ended up in the library, because that was where Harry spent his nights anyway and he knew it was safe. Hermione stopped just inside the doorway when she saw the state of the table, the stacked books, the notebook filled with his cramped handwriting, the list of cross-references pinned down by the corner with an empty inkpot. Harry, she said. How long have you been? Sit down, he said, pulling out a chair for her. This is going to take a while and I need you to hear all of it before you say anything. Can you do that? She sat down, straightened her spine, folded her hands on the table in front of her, and gave him the look of someone settling in for a serious proceeding. All right, she said. He told her everything. He'd rehearsed it, the order of it, the way to present the information so that it built logically rather than just landing all at once. He started with the portrait, who it was, how he'd found it, what Lily had said. He moved through the Horcrux revelation, the mechanics of it, the implications. He explained Dumbledore's calculation, not as his own accusation, but as the logical conclusion the evidence pointed to. He laid out the anima vinculum theory from the Black Library books, walked her through his working. He talked about Nicholas Flamel, about the ancient compact, about the possibility that the Horcrux inside him was not what Dumbledore believed it to be. He spoke for nearly 40 minutes without stopping. He didn't editorialize. He just presented what he had, the way a person presents evidence, and let it stand on its own weight. Hermione didn't say anything until he was done. Then she said nothing for another 2 minutes, which was actually longer than the active silence, in terms of intensity. Show me the notebook, she said. He slid it across the table. She opened it and read with the same focused completeness she brought to everything, not skimming, working through each point, her eyes moving steadily across his handwriting. Occasionally she reached out and pulled one of the library books toward her to check a reference. Once she made a sound that wasn't quite a word but contained a considerable amount of information, the sound of someone finding that a piece of evidence is more solid than they'd hoped. After another 20 minutes she closed the notebook and sat back. The anima vinculum sourcing, she said. This is from Borovich. I've read Borovich. His theoretical framework is considered extremely fringe by the mainstream in 1987, Harry said. When was the last serious academic work done on sacrificial magic? Nobody studies it because it's not repeatable, you can't run controlled experiments on it. The absence of mainstream attention isn't the same as the theory being wrong. Hermione blinked. He could see her recalibrating, working through that. Fair, she said, which from Hermione was roughly equivalent to a standing ovation. The thing I can't source fully yet, Harry said, pressing forward, is the specific mechanics of how the Horcrux might have changed over 16 years of contact with the protection magic. I have circumstantial theoretical support for it. These 3 texts here all talk about Horcrux instability under conditions of sustained magical exposure, but I don't have a practical framework for what it would look like or what it would mean for whether you can remove it without dying, Hermione said. Her voice was very controlled. Yes. She was quiet for another moment. Then she looked up at him, and her eyes were very bright and her jaw was tight and he could see, underneath all the analytical machinery, the thing she'd been holding down for the last hour. Harry, she said. If this is true, and the evidence is, She stopped. Tried again. He's been doing this to you since you were a baby. He chose this for you before you could, you were 15 months old. Her voice fractured on the last word, sharp and involuntary, and she pressed her lips together hard. I know, Harry said. I'm furious, she said, which was possibly the most restrained way anyone had ever expressed what was clearly a truly spectacular rage. Her hands were flat on the table and her knuckles were white. I keep thinking about all the times I encouraged you to trust him. All the times I said Dumbledore knows what he's doing, Harry, Dumbledore has his reasons, Harry. She cut herself off, and when she spoke again her voice was quiet and surgical. I was helping him manage you. You didn't know, Harry said. Neither did I. That's not the comfort you think it is. He almost smiled. No. I know. She exhaled sharply through her nose. Pulled the notebook back toward her and opened it again, scanning backward through his notes. He could see her rebuilding, recategorizing, running the last 5 years of Hogwarts through a different filter. It was fascinating to watch, in a grim way, like watching a very good mechanic take apart an engine they trusted that turned out to have a design flaw built into it from the factory. Flamel, she said. The portrait mentioned him. Said he has reason to want Dumbledore's plan to fail. He would, Hermione said immediately, which surprised Harry. Why? She looked up from the notebook. Because Dumbledore was the one who convinced him and Perenelle to destroy the stone. Think about it, Flamel was immortal, or effectively immortal, and Dumbledore persuaded him to give that up, told him it was necessary, told him the stone was too dangerous to exist. She paused. What if Dumbledore wanted the stone gone for reasons that had less to do with Voldemort and more to do with the fact that a 600-year-old independent magical theorist with essentially unlimited resources was an unmanageable variable in his plans? Harry stared at her. Hermione, he said. I know, she said, in a tone of complete self-disgust. I can't believe I never thought of it that way before. I just accepted the framing. We all did. She shook her head sharply, dismissing whatever she was feeling about her own blind spots, refocusing. So Flamel is possibly an ally. Possibly. But he's dying. Slowly, Harry said. They destroyed the stone but the effects aren't instantaneous, Dumbledore told me that at the end of first year. He's old, but he's still there. And the portrait said he knows more about soul magic and protective enchantments than anyone living. How do we contact him without the Order knowing? Harry had been thinking about this. Your parents, he said. Hermione looked at him. My parents? They're muggles. They don't exist in the Wizarding Communication Network, no owl monitoring, no flow surveillance. If you write to Flamel through Muggle Post, using your parents' address, that's actually quite clever, she said. I have my moments. She looked at him then, really looked, not the analytical scan but something more personal. He watched her work through the full weight of what he'd told her, felt her arriving at the same place he'd been sitting in for 5 days. She'd done it in under 2 hours, which was about as long as he'd expected it to take her. What do you need from me, she said. Everything, Harry said honestly. Your mind, specifically. I need someone who can work through the theoretical framework with me in real time, test my logic, find the holes in the argument before I build something on a foundation that turns out to be rotten. He paused. And I need someone who can help me figure out what I'm actually capable of, magically. Because according to my mother, my education has been, deliberately constrained, Hermione said flatly. She said it like someone confirming a diagnosis they'd already suspected. You know, there was always something slightly odd about your scores. Not that you're not good, you're exceptional, practically, in a way that doesn't always show up on exams, but there was always this ceiling. Like you'd reach a certain point and then just, stop progressing. She frowned. I thought it was study habits. It might have been more than that. If Dumbledore had any influence over the curriculum, which as Supreme Mugwump and member of the Board of Governors he absolutely did, he could have ensured that certain advanced areas were never formally taught in ways that would push you specifically. She was thinking out loud now, talking fast. Not so obvious that anyone would notice. Just, the right topics never covered in the right sequence, the right books never assigned, the right teachers never hired for more than a year, Hermione. Harry kept his voice level. I need to know what I can actually do. I need someone to push me, without a ceiling. And I need you to be honest with me when I'm wrong about something, not kind. She met his eyes. When am I ever kind instead of honest? Point, Harry said. She was quiet for a moment. Something resolved in her face, not a decision, exactly, more like the completion of one. You should know, she said carefully, that this is terrifying. What you're describing. The implications of it, for Dumbledore, for the Order, for everything we've been told and believed, it's genuinely frightening. I know. And I think you're right, she said. About all of it. Which is worse than if you were wrong. Harry nodded. So we do this properly, she said. No half measures. We gather every piece of evidence, we build the theoretical case from first principles, we find Flammel, and we work out whether there's actually a way to remove the Horcrux without, she stopped. Without killing me, Harry finished. Yes. She said it firmly, as though she was deciding it rather than just stating it. Without that. He held her gaze for a moment. Thank you, Hermione. Don't thank me, she said briskly, pulling the notebook closer and uncapping her quill. Start thanking me when we've solved the problem. For now, talk me through the Borovich framework again from the beginning. There's something in his third chapter about soul residue and I want to check whether it intersects with what you read about the anima vinculum. They worked until 4 in the morning. The next day was an order meeting. Harry sat at the long kitchen table between Ron, who'd noticed something was different about Harry but hadn't said anything yet, in the way that Ron processed things at his own pace and waited until he had them properly figured out before speaking, and Hermione, who had shifted into a mode that Harry recognized as her combat mode, a kind of perfectly composed watchfulness that looked like calm but was actually the state she entered when she was paying attention to absolutely everything. Dumbledore was there. That was unusual. Dumbledore's appearances at Grimmauld Place had been rare and brief this summer, and there was something in the quality of his arrival, unhurried, warm, that particular aura of serene authority he generated simply by walking into a room, that Harry had always responded to with a kind of reflexive comfort. He watched himself not feel that, this time. It was a strange sensation. Like watching a hand reach for something it had always automatically reached for and finding the motion interrupted by a new awareness. Why am I reaching for this? Do I actually want it? The comfort didn't arrive. In its place was something clear-eyed and cold and very, very attentive. Dumbledore looked at him, across the table, and smiled. Harry, he said, with that warm particular quality. You're looking somewhat better. Grimmauld Place seems to be agreeing with you. Getting plenty of reading done, Harry said pleasantly. Something flickered in Dumbledore's eyes, so fast it was nearly nothing, a brief sharpening of that blue gaze, and was gone. He moved on, taking his seat at the head of the table, and the meeting proceeded. Harry listened to every word. The Order discussed Voldemort's movements, 3 suspected attacks in the north, the Azkaban situation still unstable, the Ministry's denial making everything more complicated. Dumbledore spoke carefully, distributing information in his specific way, the way Harry could now identify as deliberate rationing, enough to direct people's actions without giving anyone the full picture. He'd always done it. Harry could see it now in the pattern of every meeting he could remember. The half-truths, the useful misdirections, the careful separating of each Order member's information into its own silo so that only Dumbledore held everything at once. A man who controls the flow of information to a child about their own destiny. Lily's words. What is that, strategically? It was control. It was the architecture of control dressed in the clothing of wisdom and necessity. Harry ate his soup and said nothing and catalogued everything, and by the end of the meeting he had a clearer picture of the Order's intelligence structure than he'd had in 5 years of being technically adjacent to it. Moody caught him in the corridor afterward. Potter. The magical eye swiveled independently of the real one, which was fixed on Harry's face. You're thinking hard about something. Always, Harry said. Don't be smart about it. But it wasn't quite hostile. Moody's particular tone of not quite hostile was one of the ways he expressed something adjacent to approval. The magical eye kept moving, independent, restless. Whatever you're thinking about, don't do it alone. I'm not alone, Harry said, and he meant it entirely. Moody held his gaze for another beat, then stumped away down the corridor without another word. Harry watched him go and thought, you might be useful, actually. Later. When I have more pieces in place. He went upstairs. Ron was in the room they shared, lying on his bed throwing a chaffinch snitch, a miniature one, a toy, that flew in small circles when you threw it and returned to your hand, up and down with the mechanical repetition of someone who was working up to saying something. Harry sat down on his bed across from him. You've been sneaking off at night, Ron said, still throwing the snitch. To the 3rd floor. Yeah, Harry said. Library? The snitch curved, returned. Ron caught it without looking. What are you reading? Heavy stuff. Soul magic theory. Horcruxes. Ron caught the snitch and held it. He turned his head and looked at Harry with that particular directness that people underestimated because it was wrapped in Ron's general air of cheerful unconcern. Ron was not actually unconcerned about most things. He was just someone who had grown up in a large family where subtlety was survival and he'd learned to appear relaxed while being entirely alert. What are you working out? Harry considered. He trusted Ron, trusted him at a fundamental, bone-level certainty that had nothing to do with calculation and everything to do with 7 years of evidence. But Ron's relationship with Dumbledore was woven through his whole life, through his family, through everything Arthur and Molly Weasley believed in and had shaped their children around. The Order was practically the Weasley family business. Something important, Harry said carefully. I'm not ready to walk you through all of it yet because I don't have the full picture myself. But when I do, yeah, Ron said, without waiting for the rest of it. He threw the snitch again. All right. That's it. Harry said. What do you want me to say? Ron glanced at him. You're obviously working on something serious. Hermione's been in the library too. I saw her come out at 4 this morning, mate. She had ink on her face and she looked like she'd just discovered the actual meaning of life, except Grimmer. Whatever it is, you'll tell me when you tell me. He shrugged. And if you need me before then, I'm here. Harry looked at his best friend for a moment. There's going to be a point, he said, where this gets complicated for you. Because of your family. Because of who they trust. Ron was quiet for a beat. Then, are you telling me not to trust that person? I'm telling you the full picture is more complicated than we've been shown. Ron threw the snitch 3 more times. Caught it. Squeezed it once in his fist and then set it on the nightstand. Is it Dumbledore? He said. Harry didn't answer. Right, Ron said. Yeah. That's going to be a lot. He was quiet for a moment. But you're my best mate. And if you found something real, not just grieving for Sirius something or angry at the world something, but actual real something, he met Harry's eyes directly. Then that's where I stand. Something in Harry's chest settled, firm and quiet as a stone finding the bottom of a lake. Okay, Harry said. Thank you. Don't thank me, thank Hermione, she can actually help you with the books part. Ron reached over and turned off the lamp. Get some sleep for once, you look dead on your feet. Harry lay back on his bed in the dark. He thought about what Lily had said, 2 was a fortress, and thought that 3, actually, was not a crowd but an army if the 3 were the right 3. He slept for 6 hours, the best stretch of sleep he'd had in weeks. He was back in the library by midnight. By the end of the week, he'd read through all 15 books on the initial list and pulled 9 more. The theoretical framework was getting solid enough that he could see its shape, the architecture of what Lily had described, the way the pieces interlocked. The Horcrux question remained the hardest part. Every text he'd found so far agreed that Horcruxes were designed for permanence, for total resistance to external magical intervention short of targeted destruction, which in every known case meant destroying the container. But every text was also working from the assumption that the container was an object. Something static. Something that didn't have 16 years of active magical interaction with the sole impression of the witch who'd created the ancient compact in the first place. There were no texts dealing with that specific case, because that specific case had never happened before. Which was simultaneously frustrating and the most hopeful thing Harry had encountered in all his research, because it meant nobody had proved it was impossible. The impossibility was assumed because nobody had considered the alternative. Because Dumbledore hadn't looked, as Lily had said, because Dumbledore needed the answer to be what it was. 2 weeks into Hermione's arrival, they were working late when she put down her quill and looked at him with the expression she wore when she'd solved something. "Say it," Harry said, looking up from Borovich's second volume. "The anima vinculum doesn't just affect the structure of protective magic," she said. "Look at this." She turned her notebook to face him, showing a diagram she'd built from 3 separate sources, connecting them with red ink lines. "Borovich says soul residue from a sacrificial death impresses on the survivor permanently. Ollivander's foundational work on wand cores says that a wizard's magical signature is, in technical terms, a projection of their soul. And this text," she tapped a black library book, ancient and mildew-dark, "this one says that a Horcrux exists in a target by occupying part of the host's magical signature. Claiming space in it, essentially." Harry saw where she was going before she finished. "But if the host's magical signature already has a permanent impression from the anima vinculum," he said slowly, "if part of the signature space is already occupied by the sacrificial soul residue, then the Horcrux doesn't have clean purchase," Hermione said. "It's been coexisting, essentially, with something it can't displace, for 16 years. Think of it as, if a magical signature is territory, the anima vinculum has a permanent flag planted in part of it. The Horcrux landed in the remaining space, the space the soul residue hadn't claimed. And over 16 years of constant proximity, of contact," she took a breath. "I think the boundaries between them have degraded. The Horcrux is not cleanly separable anymore. It's also not cleanly integrated. It's something in between, and that's a state that has, theoretically, very specific vulnerabilities." Harry was very still. Vulnerabilities to what? "To the specific frequency of magic that created the anima vinculum in the first place," Hermione said. "To love-based protective magic at its highest possible intensity." She looked up at him. "If you could generate that, if you could use the ancient compact as an active force rather than a passive shield, theoretically you could collapse the Horcrux from within. Use the soul residue to reclaim the territory it's been in contact with, force the Horcrux fragment out. And if you force it out, it would be exposed. No container. Unanchored." She paused. "A piece of soul with no container is like, it's volatile. Extremely volatile. Under normal conditions it would either destroy its host or dissipate. But if you could control the expulsion, if you could direct it outward, away from yourself, in a sufficiently powerful working, it would dissipate," Harry said. "Or," Hermione said, with the very specific tone of someone who had thought this through further than they initially wanted to, "it would be drawn back toward the original soul it fragmented from." The room was quiet. "Back to Voldemort," Harry said. "Yes. Which would either destroy both of them, if Voldemort's remaining soul can't handle the reintegration of a fragment that has been significantly altered by 16 years of contact with," she stopped. "With Lily's love," Harry said. "Yes." Her voice was very quiet. "With that." Harry sat back. His heart was doing something large and rhythmic in his chest. He pressed his hands flat on the table and breathed through it. This needs to go to Flamel, he said finally. This theoretical framework, he needs to see it, tell us whether it's sound, tell us what the practical working would actually look like. I wrote to him 4 days ago, Hermione said. Through my parents' address, like you suggested. She pushed a small piece of paper across the table. I got a response this morning. Harry picked it up. The handwriting was extraordinary, small, precise, with the particular quality of someone who had spent centuries developing it. Miss Granger, it read, in French that she'd already translated into a neat marginal note, the fact that you are asking these questions tells me that Harry Potter has found what I have been hoping someone would find, for several years. I will not discuss this through correspondence. Tell him, when he is ready to move, the answer will come. He will know the sign. NF, that's cryptic, Harry said. It's deliberately cryptic, Hermione said. He's being careful. But he said, when he is ready to move, not if. She held his gaze. He's already on our side. Harry set the note down on the table and looked at it for a moment. He thought about the last 2 weeks, the library nights, the notebook filling with evidence, Hermione arriving and becoming the partner in architecture he needed, Ron's uncomplicated and unshakable loyalty, the shape of the theoretical framework building itself from fragments into something that might actually hold weight. He thought about Dumbledore at that kitchen table, dispensing information in careful portions, maintaining the architecture of the plan. He thought about his mother's voice in the early morning, saying, "Fight because you want to live." Something hardened in him. Not cold, not cruel, more like metal finding its final temper, the last stage of a process that had been running since the moment the portrait first spoke. We need more than theory, he said. I need to actually practice. The kind of magic we're talking about, it's not anything I've formally studied. The love magic, the ancient compact as an active force. I need to learn it properly, and I need someone who can push me, and I need not to be supervised by the order while I'm doing it. Hermione was already nodding. I've been thinking about that. The room of requirement. We're not at Hogwarts yet. We will be in 3 weeks. She tilted her chin slightly. I've been making a list of every advanced magical concept that should have been covered in your education and wasn't. It's a long list. How long? She slid a second piece of parchment across the table. Harry picked it up, scanned it, and felt something between admiration and the grim satisfaction of having his suspicions confirmed. It was 3 pages, single-spaced. Right, he said. It's not an insurmountable gap, she said. You pick up practical magic faster than anyone I've ever seen, including fully qualified adults. If we work consistently, if you work seriously, Harry, not just when you feel like it, I'll work like my life depends on it, Harry said dryly. Because it does. Hermione blinked. Then, briefly, she almost smiled, a tight, complicated thing, the smile of someone who is not really in a smiling situation but can't entirely suppress it. That was almost funny. Almost. She gathered her notes, stacked her books, capped her quill. She paused with her hand on the lamp. You're different, she said, not an accusation, more an observation, the way she stated things that were true. Since you found the portrait. You're calmer. Which is counterintuitive, given what you found out. I know the shape of the problem, Harry said. Before, I was fighting something I couldn't see properly. Now I can see it. And that's better. Considerably. She considered that, and he could see her testing it for truth and finding it. All right, she said. Get some sleep. I will in a minute. He reached for Borovich's 3rd volume. She gave him a look that was almost maternal in its exasperation and left, pulling the door quietly behind her. Harry sat alone in the library. Borovich open in front of him, his notebook beside it, the lamp low and warm. He thought about Dumbledore's face at the meeting. The twinkle. The warmth. The careful management. He thought about what was coming, the moment, which was now inevitable, when he would have to sit across from Dumbledore and show him that the game had changed. That the piece on the board he'd been moving so carefully for 16 years had developed its own understanding of the board. He wasn't afraid of that moment. That was the thing that would have surprised him most, 6 weeks ago, the complete absence of fear at the prospect of confronting Albus Dumbledore. What he felt instead was the clear, purposeful readiness of someone who has stopped waiting for permission. He turned to Borovich's third chapter and began to read. Outside the window, London breathed in the dark, and the house held its long breath around him, and somewhere on the second floor, in a room nobody else found, his mother's portrait waited in the moonlight with 200 years of Black family magical knowledge on the shelves behind her, and everything that came next was already in motion. Chapter 3, The Cage Has Bars. The letter came on a Tuesday. It arrived with Dumbledore's owl, a large, silent bird that Harry had always found vaguely unsettling, the way it watched you with a patience that felt less like an animal waiting and more like something being observed, and it landed on the kitchen table during breakfast with a precision that managed to feel like an interruption even though everyone was already awake. Harry picked it up. Broke the seal. Read it. Dear Harry, I wonder if you might spare me an hour this afternoon. There are matters I have been meaning to discuss with you, and I feel the time has come to begin certain conversations that I have perhaps delayed longer than was wise. 3 o'clock, if it suits, I will come to Grimmauld Place. Yours, with great affection, Albus Dumbledore. Harry set the letter down and reached for his toast. Hermione, across the table, was watching him with her peripheral vision while pretending to read Magical Theory Revisited, which was something she did when she was paying very close attention to something she didn't want to appear to be paying close attention to. Ron was eating eggs with great focus. Mrs. Weasley was at the stove. Harry folded the letter and put it in his pocket. Good news? Ron said, without looking up from his plate. Dumbledore's coming at 3. The toast crunched loudly in the silence. Ron looked up. Hermione's page-turning stopped. Right, Ron said. He glanced at Hermione, then back at Harry. Something passed between the three of them that required no words, a whole conversation conducted in the shared shorthand of people who had been through things together. Do you want us? No, Harry said. I'll see him alone. He spent the next 4 hours in the library, not reading, just thinking. Running through the shape of what he knew and how he knew it and what Dumbledore was likely to say and what Harry was going to say in response, and whether there was any version of this conversation where Dumbledore simply volunteered the truth without Harry having to show his hand. He'd given that possibility about a 10% chance, which was more generous than Hermione's estimate of 4%. The problem with the conversation was not the confrontation. Harry was not dreading the confrontation, he'd been moving toward it since the night in the hidden room, and it had clarified into something he felt ready for. The problem was strategy. How much to reveal? What to let Dumbledore know he knew, and what to keep in reserve. The temptation was to lay everything on the table at once, the portrait, the Horcrux, the anima vinculum theory, the 3-week research campaign, Flamel's letter, and watch Dumbledore's careful composure crack. But that was the emotional response, not the strategic one. Lily had said, fight smart. Showing everything you had was not fighting smart. Showing enough to force the truth out of Dumbledore, while keeping the rest in reserve, that was fighting smart. He decided what he was going to say at about 2:30, and he spent the remaining time not rehearsing it but settling into it, the way you settled into a Quidditch match mindset, not anxious, not over-planning, just present and ready to move. At 3:05, Dumbledore arrived. He came through the floor, which he always did, taking the hospitality of Grimmauld Place as naturally as breathing, the ease of a man who considered himself always welcome. He was wearing deep purple robes today, and he looked, as he always looked, like the embodiment of benevolent power, like the idea of trustworthy authority given a body and put into the world. Harry met him in the hallway. Harry. The warmth was immediate and genuine. That was the thing, it was real, the warmth, which was what made it so complicated. Dumbledore genuinely cared about him. Harry knew that. He'd known it for 3 weeks and it hadn't changed any of the other things he knew. You look well. Shall we use the drawing room? Sure, Harry said. They settled in the drawing room, Dumbledore in the high-backed chair that had been Sirius's, which Harry noticed without reacting to, and Harry across from him on the settee with his elbows on his knees, relaxed and open, the posture of someone who wasn't managing anything. Dumbledore looked at him with those blue eyes, half-moon glasses catching the afternoon light, and did what he always did at the beginning of these meetings, took a moment, a deliberate one, as though simply looking at Harry was something worth taking time for. How have you been? Dumbledore asked. Truly. It has been a difficult summer. Honestly? Harry said. Better than you might expect. Reading a lot. Thinking. Getting some things clearer. Oh. And there it was, the slight shift in Dumbledore's attention, almost imperceptible, like a very still lake developing the faintest current beneath its surface. What sort of things? The Horcruxes, Harry said. Directly and immediately, watching Dumbledore's face. Your hunt for them. How many you've found. What you're planning to do about the ones that are left. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. The blue gaze was very steady, not alarmed but recalibrated, assessing, which Harry recognized because he'd been on the receiving end of that assessment for 5 years and now he could see the machinery of it. I had intended to begin discussing this with you this year, Dumbledore said. In fact, that was rather the purpose of today's conversation. I'm glad the subject has come up naturally. It tells me your mind has been working on the right things. Has it been working on the right things, Harry said, or have I gotten to the point where I needed to know them regardless of timing? The faintest pause. Perhaps both. Harry let that sit for a moment. Let the silence do a little work. Then, walk me through it. The Horcruxes. All of them, how many there are, how many you've found, and what needs to happen to end this. Dumbledore studied him. That moment was interesting, the quality of it, the specific way Dumbledore was deciding something. Harry watched him make the calculation, watched him resolve it toward a form of honesty, though not the complete form. I believe Voldemort created 6 Horcruxes, Dumbledore said. A diary, which you yourself destroyed in your 2nd year. A ring, which I retrieved last year, though at some cost. He held up his hand briefly, the black and withered fingers. A locket, a cup, an object likely connected to Ravenclaw, and Voldemort's snake, Nagini. He paused. This year, I intend to take you with me, to show you my memories of Voldemort's past, to help you understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. 6, Harry said. He kept his voice entirely neutral. 6, Dumbledore confirmed. Harry counted. A diary. A ring. A locket. A cup. Something of Ravenclaw's. Nagini. 6. Not 7. He sat with that for a full 3 seconds. 3 seconds in which the conversation felt entirely normal, and beneath that surface Harry registered, with a cold and crystalline clarity, that Dumbledore had just looked directly at him and omitted the 7th Horcrux. He'd been given a chance. A small one, maybe the only one he'd get. He could push now, directly, and force the admission, what about the one inside me, and watch what Dumbledore did with that. Watch whether the old man lied to his face, or deflected, or finally told the truth. The 10% possibility. And once all 6 are destroyed? Harry said, choosing not to push yet. Choosing instead to hear the shape of the plan from Dumbledore's own mouth. Then Voldemort can be killed, Dumbledore said. By you. The prophecy ensures it, only you can be the one to end him, the connection between you demands it. But with the Horcruxes gone, the killing will be permanent. And you want me to do that, Harry said. Kill him. Yes. Simply, directly. After which, presumably, I'm fine. I walk away. War over, everyone goes home. Dumbledore held his gaze. And here, this was the moment Harry had been waiting for, the inflection point where the specific quality of Dumbledore's response would tell him everything. There was a beat, barely there, barely anything, almost nothing, and then Dumbledore said, "That is what we are working toward, yes. That is what we are working toward." Not, "Yes, absolutely." Not, "Of course." Not the clean, unqualified affirmation that an innocent man with nothing in reserve would give. Instead, a carefully constructed sentence that was technically not a lie while being entirely dishonest. Harry had been taught to parse language by 5 years of watching Dumbledore and 3 weeks of understanding why it mattered. "Professor," Harry said, and he let his voice change, not to anger, but to something more precise, "what would you tell me if you knew I wasn't going to like hearing it?" Dumbledore blinked. Not dramatically, a single, slow blink, but it was genuine. He hadn't expected that particular question in that particular form, and the micro-expression that moved across his face was the closest thing to caught Harry had ever seen on him. "I beg your pardon. You have a specific way of talking to me," Harry said, still level, still conversational, his hands loose on his knees. "You tell me things carefully. In portions. You decide what I need to know and when, and you give me exactly that, framed in exactly the right way. And it usually works because I trust you, and because I haven't had a reason to notice the pattern." He paused. "I'm noticing the pattern." Dumbledore was very still. The warmth hadn't left his face exactly, but it had shifted, something underneath it more visible now, something careful and calculating and old. "You've been doing some thinking," Dumbledore said. "I told you I had. May I ask, what prompted this particular line of, 'the Horcruxes,'" Harry said. "Specifically. You said 6. Voldemort made 6. Are you sure about that number?" The room was quiet. The afternoon light was going golden through the windows. Dust moved in it, slow and indifferent. Dumbledore looked at Harry Potter, who was 16 years old and sitting across from him with the kind of stillness that had nothing passive in it, and Harry watched the older man arrive at a decision. He could see it happening, the internal calculation, the assessment of how much Harry knew versus how much Harry was implying, the calculation of what served the plan better, continued management, or a form of honesty. "What do you know?" Dumbledore said quietly. "I know about the 7th Horcrux," Harry said. "The one you didn't mention. The one that's been living in me since the night my parents died." The silence that followed was the longest Harry had ever sat in. Dumbledore closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, something in his face had shifted into a territory Harry hadn't seen before, not the warmth, not the authority, but something underneath both of those, something that looked almost like grief. "How long have you known?" "Long enough." "Harry," Dumbledore leaned forward slightly, and his voice had changed, lower and more direct than Harry had ever heard from him. "I want you to understand that every decision I have made regarding this, every one, was made with the intention of ultimately protecting the greatest number of people. The weight of this war, the scale of what is at stake, I know exactly what you'll say," Harry said. "I've been thinking about it for 3 weeks. You're going to tell me that one life against thousands is a simple calculation. That you've spent years grieving the necessity of it. That if there were another way you would have found it and that there isn't. And you're going to say all of that with absolute sincerity, because you believe it." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "You never looked for another way." "I looked, you looked long enough to confirm what you'd already decided." Harry's voice was still completely level. This was important, not shouting, not breaking, not giving Dumbledore the emotional turbulence he could manage and redirect. Just clarity. You needed the answer to be what it was. So when the answer appeared to be what you needed, you stopped looking. Dumbledore was quiet. "You placed me with the Dursleys," Harry said. "You managed my education. You allowed me to walk into dangerous situations repeatedly without adequate preparation. You withheld information about my own life and my own destiny at every stage where having it might have changed my choices." He paused. "And you did all of it in service of a plan whose endpoint was my death. To save millions of lives, Dumbledore said quietly. Yes, Harry said. I'm not saying it was easy for you. I'm saying you made the choice, and it wasn't yours to make. He let that land. I was 15 months old when you decided I was going to die for this. I didn't get a vote. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. And then he said something Harry hadn't expected, something that landed harder than a denial would have, or an apology, or a justification. No, Dumbledore said. You didn't. The simple acknowledgement of it. No excuse attached. Just the fact, stated plainly, which was somehow both the most honest thing Dumbledore had ever said to him and the most devastating. Harry sat with it. Let it be what it was, the admission of a man who had done a terrible thing and knew it and had done it anyway. I'm not going to die for this, Harry said. I want to be clear about that. Not because I don't care about stopping Voldemort, I care about that more than anything. But because there are other ways, and you didn't look for them, and I am. He kept his voice steady. I'm going to find the answer you didn't look for. And when I've found it, I'm going to end Voldemort on my terms, not yours. Something moved through Dumbledore's expression. It was complex and layered, and Harry, watching it, could identify several of its components: surprise, genuine and unguarded, something that might have been relief, quickly controlled, a sharper thing underneath both of those that was concern of a specific kind. Harry, Dumbledore said carefully, I understand. I'm not asking for your understanding, Harry said. I'm telling you where I stand. He stood up. I'll still work with you. On the Horcrux hunt, the external ones. I'll go with you to the memories. I'll take Voldemort down. But I'm not walking into this as your instrument. I'm walking in as myself. He looked down at Dumbledore in the high-backed chair, and he felt the strange, vertiginous shift in gravity of it, the way the whole shape of their relationship had just rearranged around a new center. And if you try to remove my choice from this again, if I find out you've withheld something relevant to my survival, we're done. Dumbledore sat very still. You found something, Dumbledore said quietly. Something more than just the fact of the Horcrux. Harry said nothing. A potential alternative. Dumbledore's eyes had changed again, sharper, more intent, the warmth entirely subordinate now to the working mind beneath it. Someone has been helping you. I've been helping myself, Harry said. Something you should have encouraged about 5 years ago. A long moment. And then Dumbledore did something Harry hadn't remotely predicted. He leaned back in the chair, and the tension went out of his frame, and he looked old. Actually, genuinely old, the vast age of him suddenly visible in a way it usually wasn't. Not weakened. Not diminished. Just old, carrying something heavy that he'd been carrying for so long it had become part of his posture. You're angry, Dumbledore said. I'm clear, Harry said. That's different. It is, Dumbledore said, and there was something in his voice that Harry couldn't quite categorize. It wasn't approval, it wasn't exactly sadness, it was something between those that Harry didn't have a name for yet. It is different. He was quiet for a moment. Will you sit down? No, Harry said simply. I think we're done for today. Dumbledore looked up at him. Harry, whatever you found, whatever path you're considering, please be careful. Not because I want to limit you. Because some of the magic at the edges of what you're describing is genuinely dangerous, in ways that aren't always visible until they've already done damage. Is that a warning or a threat? A warning, Dumbledore said, and Harry believed him. Whatever you think of me right now, and you have every reason to think what you think, I don't want you to die, Harry. I never wanted that. I accepted it because I believed it was necessary. He paused. If it isn't necessary, he stopped. Then you wasted 16 years, Harry said. And you owe my parents an apology. He left before Dumbledore could respond. Into the hallway, up the stairs, past the second floor to the third, into the library where Hermione was already sitting with her notes spread across the table, because she'd known he'd come here directly. She looked up the moment he came through the door, reading his face in one pass. "He confirmed it," she said. "He confirmed it." Harry sat down across from her. His hands were completely steady. He said 6 Horcruxes. I said I knew about the 7th. He didn't deny it. Hermione exhaled, a controlled sound that nevertheless contained a considerable amount of feeling. And he said it was necessary. He said every decision was made to protect the most people. He said, Harry stopped. Pressed his fingers against the table. He said I didn't get a vote. Not as a justification. Just as a fact. He looked up at her. He knows I'm working on something. He could tell. He warned me to be careful about dangerous magic. What did you tell him? That I was ending this on my terms. Harry paused. I told him if he withholds anything relevant to my survival again, we're done. Hermione was quiet for a moment. And he just accepted that. He looked old, Harry said. Which wasn't exactly an answer, but it was the truest description of what had happened at the end of the conversation. Like someone who's been carrying something for a very long time and has just had someone tell them they noticed the weight of it. He shook his head slightly. He's not going to stop trying to manage it. But he knows the dynamic has changed. He knows I'm not going in blind anymore. Does that make things more dangerous or less? Hermione asked. Harry thought about it honestly. Both, he said. He might be more honest now, partially, in the way he's capable of. But he might also try to redirect things. Pull me back toward his timeline, his method, under the new framing of giving me agency while still steering the outcome. He'll try to be less heavy-handed, Hermione said. Which makes him harder to track. Yeah. Harry pulled his notebook toward him. Which is why we move faster. What did you find today? She flipped her notes around. Something significant. The Black Library has a text on anima vinculum practice, not just the theory, actual historical case studies. There was a wizard in the 15th century, a Polish occlumens named Radosław Wisniewski, who survived having a dark soul fragment attached to him after a curse. The attachment wasn't a Horcrux, it was something called a shadow binding, but the theoretical structure is very similar, and the method used to expel it without killing him involved. She stopped. What? Harry said. Sustained occlumency, she said. Not the defensive kind you've been taught, or not taught, accurately, because Snape's approach was, she pressed her lips together briefly. Anyway. Not the wall-building kind. The active kind. Deep occlumency, where you move through your own mindscape with intention and locate things rather than just repelling them from the surface. Harry sat with that. I'd need to find the Horcrux inside my own mind. More than find it. Navigate to it, understand its current state, whether the anima vinculum has done what we think it's done, and then, theoretically, use the active form of the ancient compact to force it out from within. She held his gaze. Which means learning a form of occlumency that Snape never taught you. That Snape possibly couldn't teach you, because it requires a different orientation entirely, not keeping things out, but going in. And then the expulsion working, Harry said, thinking through it, which requires generating love-based protective magic at the highest possible intensity. Actively. He paused. That's not something you can practice from books. No, Hermione agreed. I'd need to understand what I did, or what my mother did, at the deepest possible level. The mechanics of it. The portrait, Hermione said. The portrait, he agreed. And Flammel. If we can get to him before, the door opened. It was Ron, which was not a surprise, but his expression was, because Ron's face was doing something Harry had only seen it do a handful of times, that particular combination of quiet determination and carefully managed apprehension, the look of someone who has made a decision they know is going to cost them something. He came in and shut the door behind him and sat down at the table without being asked. I went for a walk, Ron said, in the tone of someone providing context for what they're about to say. After Dumbledore left. He looked, I don't know. He looked like someone who just had something taken from them. He looked at Harry. It was you, wasn't it? Harry held his gaze. Yes. Ron nodded slowly. He was quiet for a moment that felt like it had weight in it, not awkward weight, significant weight. Mum cried the first time she talked about Dumbledore to me. I was about 8. He'd come for dinner once, when Dad had done something, I don't even remember what, some order thing, and Mum cried afterward because she said he was the reason we were all still alive, the reason the First War ended, the reason there was still something worth protecting. He paused. I grew up believing that as fundamentally as I believed anything. Ron, Harry said. I'm not done. Ron's jaw was set. I talked to Ginny this morning, not about all of it, not the details, just, I asked her, hypothetically, what she'd do if she found out someone she completely trusted had been, not evil, exactly, but had been making decisions they didn't have the right to make. About someone else's life. He looked at Harry. She said she'd burn it down. Ginny's very straightforward about these things. He almost smiled. And she said, if it's Harry, you already know what to do. Harry didn't say anything for a moment. You talked to Ginny? She'd worked it out herself, Ron said, with a slight shrug that was entirely undermined by the fondness and exasperation competing in his voice. She's not stupid. She's been watching you since you got here and she said you were different in a way that had a specific shape to it. Her words. I told her you'd have to tell her yourself. He paused. She wants in, by the way. That's not me speaking for her, she told me to tell you directly, she wants in, and if you tell her no she'll find her own way in regardless, so you might as well. He raised his hands. I'm just the messenger. Harry thought about Ginny Weasley, who had spent her first year at Hogwarts possessed by Tom Riddle's diary and who had grown into one of the most capable witches in their year and who had a specific, personal, bone-deep understanding of what Voldemort's presence felt like from the inside. She's in, Harry said. Ron let out a breath. Then he looked at the table, at Hermione's notes, at Harry's notebook, at the stacked books with their worn spines and their marginalia. Right, he said. Tell me everything. And I mean actually everything, not the edited version. I can handle it. So they told him. Hermione walked him through the theoretical framework with the same methodical clarity she'd used on Harry, and Harry filled in the personal pieces, the portrait, Lily, the night in the small room with the moonlight. Ron listened without interrupting, which was notable, because Ron's default setting was not silent. He listened the way he played chess, whole body focused, seeing the board. When they finished, Ron sat back and stared at the ceiling for a solid 10 seconds. Okay, he said finally. Okay. Hermione said. Give me a minute. He stared at the ceiling for another 5 seconds. Then he straightened up and put his elbows on the table and looked at Harry with that particular Ron directness, no pretense, no management, just his actual face wearing his actual reaction. He chose to let you die. And he never looked for another way because the plan worked better if there wasn't one. He paused. Right? Right. And you might have found one. We might have found one, Harry corrected, gesturing to include Hermione. Ron looked at the two of them. Something moved through his face, anger, grief, loyalty, resolution, in that order, each of them clearly visible and none of them performed. What do you need from me? Honestly? Harry said. Someone who fights well and thinks fast and doesn't panic, and who I trust completely. The magic of this is going to be on Hermione and me. The strategy is going to involve more people, Neville, Luna, eventually others. But the foundation is us three. I can do the fighting and the not panicking part, Ron said. The theory's beyond me and I know it. But I can hold a line and I can watch a back and I can be somewhere difficult and keep my head. He nodded once, decisively. I'm there. That night, Harry went back to the hidden room. Lily's portrait was lit by moonlight again, as though the house maintained the habit of the light hitting it at that specific angle. She looked at him when he came in, and something in her painted face shifted into a warmth that was specific, that recognized him, not the general warmth of a portrait, but the specific warmth of a mother looking at her child. "You saw him," she said. "Yeah." Harry sat down on the floor. He confirmed it. Didn't deny the Horcrux, didn't deny the plan. He said every decision was necessary. He paused. He said I didn't get a vote. He said it like a fact. It was a fact, Lily said. He was telling the truth, in his way. That's what made him think it was acceptable, that it was simply a fact of the situation, the way natural forces are facts. He also looked old, Harry said. After I told him I was finding another way. He looked, I don't know. Like something he'd been holding in a particular shape for a long time had shifted. Lily was quiet for a moment. He does love you, she said. In the way I described. That's real. Don't let anger at him take that from you, not because he deserves the consideration, but because accurate perception of who people are is a tool, and you'll need it. I know, Harry said. I'm not letting the anger run the show. I told him where I stood. Clearly, without losing it. He looked up at her. I need to learn deep occlumency. Not the wall-building kind, the navigating kind. Hermione found a case study, the anima vinculum expulsion through internal exploration. Wisniewski, Lily said immediately. Harry blinked. You know it? Your grandfather had the source text. I've spent 15 years reading that library. She almost smiled. Yes. The deep occlumency, it's called legilomentic introspection in some texts, though that's a slightly misleading name. It's not reading minds, it's reading yourself. Moving through your own mindscape with intent and awareness instead of standing at the edge of it with a wall up. Can you teach me? Some of it. The theoretical foundation, the orientation of it. The actual practice you'll need to do yourself, and you'll need a skilled legilimens to check your progress. To go in with you, initially, until you know your own mind well enough to navigate alone. Snape's a legilimens, Harry said flatly. Yes, Lily said, in a tone that contained 17 different things. Harry pressed his fingers over his eyes for a moment. I'm going to have to deal with Snape, he said. Aren't I? Snape is the finest occlumens alive and the most skilled legilimens outside of Dumbledore, Lily said. And he has complicated reasons to want Dumbledore's specific plan to fail. He doesn't know about the Horcrux. But if he did, she paused. He loved me very much, Harry. Whatever his faults, whatever he became, that was real. If he understood what had been growing in you since that night, a piece of Voldemort's soul in continuous contact with the magical impression of the woman she stopped. It would matter to him. In ways that might override his other loyalties. Or he'd go straight to Dumbledore. He might, Lily said. That's a real risk. But Snape is not simple, and he's not entirely Dumbledore's. He's been playing a double game for 15 years and he's still alive. That requires a self-preservation intelligence that operates independent of his stated allegiances. She held Harry's gaze. I think if you approach him carefully, not subserviently, not with the James Potter posture that triggers everything bad in him. I'm not James Potter, Harry said. No, Lily said. You're not. And he knows that, underneath everything. Use it. Harry sat with that. The idea of voluntarily approaching Snape, not being sent to him, not dreading the next lesson, but walking up and initiating, on his own terms, a request for something specific, had an entirely different quality to it than everything that had gone before. It wasn't dread. It was closer to a tactical calculation. All right, he said. Teach me the theory. Now, tonight. All of it. Lily looked at him, that bright fierce look, the one that was pride and recognition and something he'd spent 16 years not having and could now let himself simply receive. You understand, she said, that once you start navigating inward, you'll find things you didn't know were there. The Horcrux is one of them. But the anima vinculum impression, what's left of me, is another. And you'll have to be prepared for what that feels like. Harry thought about that. He thought about what it would mean to find, inside his own mind, something that had been his mother for 16 years without his knowing. I know, he said quietly. And you're all right with that? He looked at her face in the moonlight. The portrait, the painted canvas, the magical construct, the clever artifice of a grief-stricken grandfather who'd wanted something of his daughter left behind. And inside him, somewhere deep where the scar burned and his magic lived, the real thing, the actual residue of her, the impression of a terrible and beautiful act of love made when he was 15 months old and she was standing between him and the worst thing in the world. Yeah, Harry said. I think I've been all right with that for a long time without knowing it. Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she leaned forward, and she began to teach him how to find himself. Chapter 4, New Allegiances. The thing about learning to navigate your own mind was that it felt, at first, like trying to read a book that kept rewriting itself while you were holding it. Harry had been practicing for 5 days. 30 minutes each morning before the house woke up, sitting cross-legged on the library floor with his back against the bookshelf and his eyes closed, doing what Lily had described as the first stage, simply looking inward without trying to control what he saw. Not building walls, not organizing, not defending. Just observing. Becoming familiar with the landscape of his own consciousness the way you become familiar with a new city, walking the streets without a destination first, learning the shape of it. What he found was not what he'd expected. He'd expected something like the pensive, memories arranged in sequence, accessible and clear. What he found instead was more like weather. Vast, shifting, atmospheric. There were regions that felt warm and solid, Ron and Hermione, Quidditch, Grimmauld Place in the small hours quiet, and regions that felt unsettled, turbulent, generating a low continuous pressure that he'd lived with so long he'd stopped noticing it was there. The Dursleys lived in one of those regions. The Department of Mysteries in another. And deep beneath both of them, underneath everything, two distinct presences. One was cold. Not actively hostile but deeply, inherently wrong in the way a dissonant chord was wrong, not silent, never silent, but fundamentally mismatched to everything around it. He could feel it in the way you felt a tooth that needed attention before it actually started hurting, a persistent wrongness, something that didn't belong in the architecture. The other was warm. Had always been warm. He'd been feeling it his whole life as something, the instinct that always told him to protect people, the magic that responded fastest and strongest when someone he loved was in danger, the particular quality of his Patronus. He'd always attributed those things to himself, to his own character, and they were his, but they were also hers. The impression of his mother, woven into him since he was 15 months old, speaking through him in the language of magic. He sat with both of them, morning after morning, and learned their textures. Learned where they were relative to each other. Learned, as Lily had predicted, the places where their boundaries had degraded, where the cold presence had been in contact with the warm one for 16 years and had been, slowly, inexorably, changed by the proximity. On the 5th morning, he opened his eyes and thought, I know where it is. He told Hermione at breakfast, quietly, while Mrs. Weasley's back was turned. You found it, she said, not loudly, her voice dropped into the register they'd been using all summer for conversations that couldn't carry. She had her tea halfway to her mouth and she stopped it there. You actually found it. I know where it is relative to everything else. I can navigate to it. He reached for the toast. I can't do anything with it yet, I need the occlumency skills to actually manipulate what's there. But the map is drawn. Hermione set her tea down. You need Snape. I need Snape, Harry agreed. He's going to be terrible about it. Probably. He buttered his toast. I'm going anyway. Hermione looked at him with that specific expression she wore when she thought something was simultaneously a bad idea and the only viable option, which was an expression she'd been wearing with increasing frequency this summer. When? Today. She opened her mouth. Harry, he's at Hogwarts. Or Spinner's End. You can't just, I can apparate, Harry said. You're not licensed. I've been practicing in the garden at 3 in the morning. He met her look. I can do it fine. I've been doing it fine for 2 weeks. Hermione closed her eyes briefly in the manner of someone who was registering this information and filing it alongside a growing list of things Harry had been doing independently that she hadn't known about. At 3 in the morning, she repeated. Night practice is quieter. Harry. Hermione. She exhaled. At least take Ron. Ron's coming with me somewhere else first, Harry said. There's someone I need to see before Snape. 2 someones, actually. She tilted her head, reading him. Neville. And Luna. She nodded slowly. The prophecy angle. Partly. And partly because, he stopped. Thought about how to say it. I keep thinking about what Lily said. That I've been fighting blind. And that's true of all of us, not just me. Neville has been living with the shadow of that prophecy his whole life, the one that could have named him. He deserves to know why. He deserves to understand the full shape of what's happening. And Luna, he paused. Luna sees things. That's vague. It's accurate, Harry said. They took the night bus to the edge of the village outside Neville's grandmother's house, because apparition to an unfamiliar location you'd never personally scoped out was the kind of risk Harry was not yet willing to take. Ron complained about the night bus at every available opportunity, being thrown into the seat in front of them when it lurched to a stop 3 times in 15 minutes, but he did it with the good-natured resignation of someone who had agreed to the mission and understood that discomfort was part of it. Augusta Longbottom opened the front door, looked at the 3 of them on her front step, and said, in the way that older witches of her particular type said it, which was not disapproval exactly but a comprehensive assessment delivered in a single syllable. Neville has friends, she said. This is good. Come in. Neville was in the back garden, practicing transfiguration with a methodical focus that Harry recognized, the same focused practice he'd seen in Hermione, the kind driven by internal motivation rather than external requirement. He was working on something complicated, a full-form transformation of a clay pot into a working clock, and he got it on the 4th attempt, the gears assembling themselves into proper motion with a clean click. He looked up when Harry appeared at the garden door, and something in his expression did the thing expressions did when they were navigating surprise and trying not to show how much they'd needed something. Harry, he said. Then, looking past Harry at Ron and Hermione, all 3 of you. Is something, nothing's on fire right now, Ron said, stepping past Harry into the garden. We're getting ahead of it. He said it like that was a perfectly ordinary sentence. Neville looked at Harry. I need to tell you some things, Harry said. About the war, about Dumbledore, about the prophecy. I need you to hear it because you deserve to, and because I think you're going to be important in what comes next. He paused. Also because you're one of the best people I know, and I'm done operating without the people I should have around me. Neville blinked. He looked at his wand in his hand, then at Harry, then at the clay pot that had become a clock. He set the wand down on the garden table. Sit down, then, he said. So Harry told him. Not the full theoretical framework, that would take days, but the essential truth of it, the Horcrux in Harry, Dumbledore's plan, the possibility of another way. And the prophecy. The fact that it could have been Neville. The fact that Neville had been marked too, in his own way, by a war that had taken his parents' minds if not their lives, and that Harry had been carrying around a corner of Neville's story without ever acknowledging it. Neville listened, and his face went through several phases, and none of them were the ones Harry might have predicted. He'd half expected shock, or perhaps the particular anguish of someone processing injustice done to someone they care about. What he got instead was a slow, steady hardening, the face of someone who had been born into something heavy and had spent 16 years building the shoulders for it. "I knew there was more," Neville said finally. "I always knew. My gran never told me the full details of the prophecy, just enough for me to understand why my parents were." He stopped. "Reset. I knew it wasn't as simple as the story everyone tells." "It's not simple," Harry said. "What do you need?" Neville asked. It was the same question Ron had asked, in almost exactly the same words, and it hit Harry the same way, as the specific and irreplaceable thing that real loyalty looked like when it wasn't performing itself. "The DA," Harry said. "But different this time. Not defense drills. Real magical development. Advanced theory, advanced practice. I need people around me who can do things Dumbledore never intended for us to be able to do, and I need a space to train that the Order isn't watching." "The room of requirement," Neville said. "That's what I said," Hermione told him. Neville almost smiled. "I spent a lot of time in that room last year. I know it pretty well." He paused. "Luna should be part of this." "We're going to see her next," Harry said. "Don't explain it slowly to her," Neville said, with the authority of someone who knew Luna Lovegood better than most people thought to try. "She already knows more than you think. Just tell her the truth directly and let her respond. If you do the gradual explanation thing, she gets bored and starts looking at the ceiling." Luna Lovegood lived at the edge of a field, in a house that looked like it had been built by someone who had a clear vision and no particular interest in structural convention. It had a garden that was more wild than tended and a weather vane shaped like a crumplehorn snorkack and an upper window where Luna herself was sitting when they arrived, apparently reading a book while upside down. She appeared at the door before they knocked, which was either extremely good timing or something else entirely. "Harry," she said. She looked at him with those large, silver-gray eyes that had always made Harry feel like he was being perceived from a very slightly different angle than everyone else perceived from. "You've been in your own head," she said. "Literally. I can tell, there's a different quality to your eyes. Like you've seen something indoors that changed how outdoor light looks." Ron made a sound. "Come in," Luna said. "I'll make tea." Her kitchen was extraordinary in the way her house was extraordinary, organized according to a logic that was entirely consistent within its own terms and entirely baffling from outside them. She made tea with the serene efficiency of someone performing a known ritual and set cups in front of each of them, and then sat across from Harry and looked at him with that clear, sideways attention. "You found something about the war," she said. "Something about yourself and Dumbledore." Harry looked at her. "You already knew something was wrong." "I've always known something was wrong," Luna said simply. "The pattern of information distribution in the Order, Dad's covered it, actually, in the Quibbler. Most people think he's wrong about everything, but the thing about conspiracy theories is that occasionally they're not theories." She tilted her head. "What did you find?" Harry told her. All of it, this time, the complete version, because Neville had been right, Luna did not need the gradual approach. She listened the way she did everything, with a completeness that had nothing to do with conventional attention and everything to do with actually hearing what was being said. When he finished, she said, "The Horcrux in you has been in contact with your mother's love magic for 16 years. Yes. So it's been marinated," Luna said thoughtfully. Ron choked on his tea. "That's not the word I'd have used," Hermione said carefully. "It's accurate though," Luna said, with the mild certainty of someone pointing out something obvious. "The Horcrux has been sitting in the warmest, most love-saturated magical environment possible for its entire existence. Of course it's changed." She looked at Harry. "Have you felt it change? From the inside?" "I'm just starting to learn how to navigate inward," Harry said. "I know where it is. I know what it feels like currently. I don't have a comparison point for how it felt before." "I do," Luna said. Everyone looked at her. She was perfectly calm. "I've been able to sense magical structures in people since I was about 8. My mother," she was a researcher, experimental charms, she died in an accident when I was 9. Afterward I started noticing things about how magic feels in the people around me. She picked up her tea. I could always sense something in you, Harry. Something that didn't match the rest of you, like a note played in the wrong key. She paused. But it's been quieter recently. The last few months. Since your 5th year, actually, when, she stopped. Since the Department of Mysteries. Since you were in proximity to the veil. The room went very still. The veil, Harry said slowly. Death magic is, particular, Luna said. The veil is essentially a concentrated point of it. Like a lens. And you were near it, for an extended period, in a state of extreme magical stress, extreme grief. She looked at him steadily. I think the proximity accelerated something. The degradation of the boundary between the Horcrux and the anima vinculum. She paused. The Horcrux has been getting quieter in you ever since that night. I don't think it's strengthening. I think it's fragmenting further. Harry sat with that. Felt around the edges of it, the implication. If it's already fragmenting, Hermione said, her voice going sharp and quick in the way it did when she was running ahead of her own conclusions, then the theoretical framework we've been working from, the active expulsion, it might require less force than we thought. If it's already destabilized, then the anima vinculum working might not have to be as extreme, Harry said. It might not have to be anything near lethal, Hermione finished. Luna nodded serenely, as though she'd been expecting this conclusion for some time. It helps to have the full picture, she said. People miss things when they only look at part of it. They had tea. And then they talked, for 3 hours, seriously and specifically, about what was coming and who needed to do what and how the new DA, which needed a different name, though they didn't decide one in that meeting, was going to operate. Luna contributed ideas that were unexpected and consistently more useful than they initially appeared. Neville, who had arrived midway through the second hour via flu, was practical in the way only someone who'd spent a year doing hard things in difficult circumstances could be. By the time Harry and Ron and Hermione left to get the night bus back to London, the shape of something was beginning to form, not fully assembled, more like the scaffolding of a thing, but recognizable. Luna, Ron said, on the walk to the bus stop, is something else. She always was, Harry said. No, I knew she was, I mean she's, the marinating thing, Ron said. Where did that even come from? It was accurate, Hermione said. Hermione agrees with Luna now, Ron said to no one in particular. Mark this day. It was late afternoon when they got back to Grimmauld Place. Harry told Ron and Hermione to go in and make excuses for dinner, and he went around the back of the house to the narrow strip of garden, which was overgrown and unwatched, and he stood in it for a moment and breathed. Then he apparat to Spinner's End. He'd found the address in a black family directory, the kind of document that catalogued the residential history of every significant wizarding family in Britain, cross-referenced with current occupants. It was 2 years out of date, but Spinner's End had been in the Snape family for 3 generations, and Harry was willing to bet it hadn't changed. He appeared at the end of the street and walked the last 50 meters, which gave him time to breathe, to settle into the frame of mind he needed. Not confrontational. Not subservient. Clear-eyed and direct. He was here because he needed something specific, and Snape could provide it, and that was the whole of it. The house was narrow and dark, backing onto a canal, the brick worn to a quality that spoke of long habitation. Harry walked up to the door and knocked. He heard movement. A pause that had a specific quality, the pause of someone on the other side of a door who has just noticed with some form of magical awareness that the person knocking is not who they expected. The door opened. Severus Snape stood in the doorway in his shirt sleeves, which was somehow the most incongruous thing Harry had ever seen, and looked at Harry Potter standing on his doorstep in the evening light of a summer Tuesday with an expression that went through 3 distinct phases in about 2 seconds. Surprise, which Snape never showed and which therefore showed itself as a very controlled flatness. Assessment. And then something behind both of those that was more complex and which Harry would need more data to interpret. "Potter," Snape said. "Professor," Harry said. "Can I come in?" Snape's eyes moved down the street, then back to Harry's face, in the practiced scan of a man who had been a spy for 15 years. "Are you alone?" "Yes." "Does Dumbledore know you're here?" "No." Something shifted in Snape's expression, infinitesimal, but visible to Harry who was paying careful attention. He stepped back from the doorway. Harry came in. The house was exactly what you'd expect of Snape, deeply orderly beneath its surface spareness, books filling every available wall, the smell of potions ingredients underlying everything. It was also, Harry noticed, a place that had been lived in alone for a very long time. It had the particular austere quality of a life organized without consideration of anyone else's presence. "Sit down," Snape said, as though the words had been extracted from him against their will. Harry sat. Snape remained standing, which was a power positioning thing, and Harry noted it and let it be. Picking this battle wasn't the point. "You didn't come here to apologize for the pensive incident," Snape said. "No," Harry said. "Though I am sorry for that. Genuinely." Snape's eyes narrowed. He was looking for the manipulation, the angle, the Potter-flavored trouble underneath the apparently clean sentiment. Harry held his gaze steadily. "I need something from you," Harry said. "Something specific. And I'm going to be completely honest about why I need it, and I'm going to ask you to consider it on its merits, not on the basis of who's asking." "A bold approach," Snape said dryly. "I've had an eventful summer," Harry said. "Can I ask you something first? Before I explain?" Snape said nothing, which Harry took as permission. "Did you ever suspect," Harry said carefully, "that Dumbledore knew more about the connection between me and Voldemort than he was sharing? Something fundamental. Something about the nature of what happened the night my parents died." The room changed. It was subtle, nothing moved, Snape's face did almost nothing, there was no dramatic shift in the atmosphere. But something happened in the quality of the silence that told Harry he had landed exactly where he needed to. "That's a specific question," Snape said. "It's a yes or no question. Very few of my questions have yes or no answers, Potter." But he sat down, across from Harry, which was itself an answer of a kind. "What do you know?" "Horcruxes," Harry said. "Specifically, the one Dumbledore didn't tell me about. The one I've been carrying since I was 15 months old." Snape was utterly, completely still. It lasted perhaps 4 seconds, that stillness, and during it Harry watched something move through Snape's eyes, not across his face, in his eyes. That was the deepest, most unguarded thing he'd ever seen in the man. It was there and gone, but it was real. "A Horcrux," Snape said. Very quietly. "A piece of Voldemort's soul. In me, since the night since my mother died." Harry kept his voice level. "Dumbledore has known for years. His plan requires that when the time is right, Voldemort kills me, the Horcrux dies with me, and then, theoretically, Voldemort can be killed permanently." He paused. "I found this out 3 weeks ago from someone who shouldn't have been able to tell me. Dumbledore confirmed it when I asked him directly." Snape was silent. "He confirmed it," he said finally. "Not a question. He said every decision was necessary. He said it was to protect the most people." Harry met his eyes. He never looked for another way. Something moved through Snape's jaw, attention, controlled instantly, but there. Harry thought about what Lily had said. "He loved me very much." That was real. And thought about what it would mean to a man who had loved Lily Evans, who had spent 20 years doing penance in a double agent's life for the choices that had led to her death, to understand that the child she died to protect had been living as a pre-marked sacrifice since infancy. That the magical impression of her love, her actual soul residue in Harry, had been living alongside a piece of the man who had killed her. "You came here," Snape said, his voice carrying a specific controlled quality, "not to tell me this. You came here because you need something. I've found a theoretical alternative, Harry said. A way to potentially remove the Horcrux without my death. It requires navigating my own mindscape at a level of internal occlumency I haven't developed yet. And it requires, he stopped. Made the decision. Said it plainly. It requires someone skilled enough in both occlumency and legilimency to go in with me initially. To check that I'm reading my own mind correctly and to help me locate what I'm looking for. You need me to perform legilimency on you, Snape said. Willingly. At your request. Yes. Snape looked at him. Harry looked back. Who helped you develop this theory? Snape said. You did not arrive at the theoretical framework for Horcrux removal through independent research in 6 weeks. Not to that level of precision. Harry considered how much to say. Then, my mother. The 2 words landed in the room like objects with physical weight. Snape's face did something extraordinary, just for a moment, something that was the opposite of controlled, the opposite of composed, something raw and structural and old. It lasted less than 2 seconds and was then entirely suppressed, but Harry had seen it, and the reality of it was the most human thing Snape had ever been in his presence. There's a portrait, Harry said, more gently than he'd intended to speak. At Grimmauld Place. My grandfather had it commissioned. It has more cognitive function than standard portraits, she can reason, develop ideas. She's been in the Black family library for 16 years. He paused. She's intelligent. And she loved you. I think she still does, whatever that means for a portrait. Snape stood up. Walked to the window. Put his back to Harry and looked out at the canal, and stood there for a moment that Harry let simply be what it was without filling it. The theory, Snape said finally, his back still to Harry. What exactly does it involve? Harry walked him through it. The anima vinculum, the Horcrux's changed state, Luna's observation about the fragmentation, the active expulsion working. He talked for 20 minutes, and Snape listened without turning around for most of it, and when Harry finished there was a long silence. Snape turned. Your analysis of the anima vinculum's effect on the Horcrux is theoretically sound, he said, and the words came out like they were made of something dense and difficult, dragged up from a place that didn't speak easily. The fragmentation hypothesis, the veil's proximity as an accelerant, he stopped. There are elements that would require verification. The internal mapping you've done, I would need to see it to assess whether you've correctly identified the Horcrux or whether you've located something else and misidentified it. That's why I need you, Harry said. Snape looked at him for a long, assessing moment. It was the look he'd given Harry across classrooms and corridors for 5 years, but different in one specific way that Harry could identify now that he was paying the right kind of attention, stripped of contempt. The contempt had always been there before, underlying everything, the Snape constant. It wasn't there now. You told Dumbledore you knew, Snape said. Yes. That was either brave or tactically reckless. I needed to know how he'd respond, Harry said. I needed to see what he'd do with a version of me that wasn't going to stay manageable. And he confirmed everything and told me it was necessary. Harry paused. And then he looked old and sad. And I left. Snape was quiet. You're not afraid of him, he said. No. You should be, at least moderately. I have a very full schedule of things to be appropriately afraid of, Harry said. Dumbledore isn't making the list right now. Something crossed Snape's face that was absolutely, definitely, entirely involuntarily, a flicker of wry amusement. It lasted approximately half a second and was suppressed with the efficiency of long practice. But it had been there. I will assist with the occlumency work, Snape said. Under specific conditions. He held up one finger. The work happens here, not at Grimmauld Place, not anywhere Dumbledore has access. 2. Another finger, I require full information about the theoretical framework as it develops. Not summaries. The actual working notes. He paused. 3. You do not tell Dumbledore we are working together. Agreed, Harry said immediately. Snape looked at him as though waiting for a complication. When none came, when? Saturday, Harry said. Morning, if you're free. I am not generally in high social demand on Saturday mornings, Snape said, with a dryness that was so perfectly calibrated it had its own gravitational field. Harry stood up. Professor, he stopped. Thought about what he wanted to say and whether to say it. Decided. She said you were the finest Occlumens alive. My mother. He kept his voice level. She said it like it was something she was proud of. Snape said nothing. His expression did nothing. But when Harry got to the front door and let himself out, he heard, from the sitting room, the sound of something set down carefully on a shelf, a deliberate movement, precisely controlled, the movement of someone buying themselves a moment they needed. Harry walked down the street and apparat back to the Grimmauld Place garden, appearing without a sound, the magic clean and precise. He stood in the evening air for a moment and felt the day's work settle around him like a completed structure. Neville. Luna. Snape. 3 pieces into place in a single day. He went inside. Ron was in the kitchen helping Mrs. Weasley with dinner, which was his way of being present and useful without needing to know the details yet, and Hermione was at the table with her notebook, and she looked up when Harry came in and read his face in one pass. Well, she said. Saturday morning, Harry said. Spinner's End. Her eyes widened slightly. He agreed. He set conditions. They were reasonable. Harry poured himself a glass of water. He's with us. Hermione sat back. On her face was an expression that was not quite relief and not quite the satisfaction of a plan coming together but somewhere between those, slightly stunned by its own reality. That's, Harry, that's significant. If Snape is with us and Flamel is with us and we have Neville and Luna and the Room of Requirement, we have something, Harry agreed. We're not ready to act yet. There's still the practice, the occlumency work, the actual construction of the expulsion working. He sat down across from her. And there are the other Horcruxes. The locket, the cup, the Ravenclaw object, the snake. Those still need to be found and destroyed. You're still going to work with Dumbledore on that. The external Horcrux hunt, yes, Harry said. He doesn't know what we're building on our side. He suspects something but he doesn't know the shape of it. He paused. He'll be watching me more carefully now. Trying to work out what I've found and who's helping me. So we're careful. We're fast, Harry corrected. Careful and fast. We don't have unlimited time. The moment Voldemort decides I'm sufficiently close to Dumbledore's intended state, he'll try to move. We need to be ahead of that. Hermione nodded. Her quill was already moving. That night, Harry went to the hidden room. Lily looked at him the moment he came through the door, and something in her expression had the particular quality of someone who had been thinking all day about a conversation they knew was coming. Snape, she said. He's going to help, Harry said. He sat down on the floor, the familiar position, the moonlight at its usual angle. He went very still when I told him about the Horcrux. About the anima vinculum. About you. Lily was quiet for a moment. How did he look? Harry considered. Like something he'd been holding for 20 years had moved. She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again her face was very composed and very careful. He made terrible choices when he was young, she said. Choices that cost him everything he actually valued. He's been paying for them ever since. She paused. I don't excuse them. But I understand them. And what he's done since, the double life, the years of risk, that's real, Harry. That matters. She held his gaze. He'll be difficult to work with. He already is, Harry said. It's fine. I'm not doing this for easy. Lily almost laughed, a small, involuntary sound. "No," she said. "You're really not." She looked at him, that steady, green-eyed look that was his eyes looking back at him with 20 years of removed perspective. "You've moved faster than I expected. I told you I'd work like my life depends on it." "Yes, but," she stopped. "You're not just working. You're building. There's a difference. The people you've gathered today, Neville, Luna, Snape, you didn't just recruit them, you saw them clearly. What each of them carries, what each of them needs, what each of them can offer." She paused. "That's not tactics. That's leadership." Harry shrugged slightly, not deflecting but not dwelling on it either. "I've had bad examples of leadership to learn from. Makes it easier to see what the right thing looks like." "Your father was a leader," Lily said. "But he led from the front, from momentum and charisma. You lead by seeing people." She tilted her head. "Voldemort leads through fear. Dumbledore leads through authority and information control. You might be the first person in this war who leads through actually knowing who's beside you." Harry sat with that. He thought about Ron in the garden at Grimmauld Place, throwing the tiny snitch at 3 in the morning, not pressing for information he wasn't ready to have yet. He thought about Hermione filling 3 pages of things Harry's education had missed, driven by the specific fury of someone who felt complicit in a wrong. He thought about Neville in his grandmother's garden with his sleeves rolled up, who had been waiting his whole life to be looked at properly and had simply been ready when Harry did it. He thought about Snape standing at his window with his back to the room, carrying something old and heavy and real. "I need to practice the internal navigation tonight," Harry said. "I've been doing the morning sessions but I want to go deeper. I think I'm ready to try approaching the cold presence directly, not touching it, just getting closer." Lily looked at him for a moment. "You'll feel things," she said. "It's not comfortable. The Horcrux carries echoes of Voldemort's mind, not full thoughts, nothing coherent, but the residue of what he is. Anger, contempt, the absence of empathy. Be prepared." "I've been living with it for 16 years, Harry said. "I just didn't know what it was." "True," Lily said. "But knowing changes it. Like how a song that was just background noise becomes unbearable once you can hear the words." Harry nodded. He closed his eyes. The library was quiet around him, the house quiet above, London quiet outside. He breathed slowly and went inward, through the warm upper layers, through the turbulent middle regions, down past the areas that had Hermione's name on them and Ron's name, down past Quidditch and Grimmauld Place, and every morning he'd woken up and still been alive. He found it easily now, the map established through 5 mornings of practice. The cold presence, deep and discordant, like a room in a house that had always been locked. He moved toward it. Closer than he'd been before. Close enough to feel the specific cold of it, the wrongness, and underneath the wrongness something that surprised him completely, something that felt less like the absolute evil he'd expected and more like something diminished. Something that had been large once and had been wearing down, inexorably, against 16 years of warmth it couldn't resist or overcome. He felt the warm presence too, beside it. The anima vinculum, his mother, the ancient compact. He felt the way the two presences overlapped at their edges, the boundary degraded exactly as Hermione had theorized, the cold presence sitting in a landscape that had been, quietly and persistently, not quite its own for every moment of Harry Potter's existence. He opened his eyes. He was smiling. Not because it was easy or safe or certain, it wasn't any of those things. But because he could see it now, completely, from the inside. He knew the territory. He knew what he was working with. He looked up at his mother's portrait. "I can do this," he said. Lily looked at him for a moment. Her face was doing the thing it did, the thing he'd had to learn to simply let himself receive. "I know," she said. "I knew before you did." Chapter 5. The War Moves First. The first Saturday session with Snape lasted 4 hours and left Harry with a headache that sat behind his eyes like a small determined fire. Not because Snape was cruel about it, which had been Harry's private expectation, the residue of fifth-year lessons where every session had felt like an assault. This was different. Snape arrived at the door of Spinner's End's small study already in what Harry was coming to recognize as his working mode, stripped of the theatrical contempt, operating at the level of a man who was genuinely good at something and knew it. He had cleared the room of most furniture and set up 2 chairs facing each other with a directness that said, no performance, no atmosphere, just the work. "Tell me what you found," Snape said, and Harry described the internal landscape of his own mind with as much precision as he could manage, the weather quality of the upper regions, the specific textures of the presences deeper down, the degraded boundary between the cold and the warm. Snape listened with his fingers steepled under his chin, and his eyes were doing the thing Harry had started to recognize in him, the thing that wasn't cruelty and wasn't warmth but was the absolute focused attention of a mind that respected the problem it was working on. "The boundary degradation you're describing," Snape said, "is consistent with what I know of Horcrux theory, though the specific cause is unprecedented." He paused with the precision of a man choosing his words carefully. "I'm going to enter your mind now. Shallowly, at first. I want to verify the external shape of what you've mapped before we go deeper. Hold still. Last time you told me to resist," Harry said. "Last time the objective was different." Snape held his gaze. "This time you let me in. Think of it as opening a door rather than holding it shut." The legitimacy that followed was nothing like the fifth-year lessons. It was more like having someone walk beside you through a space you knew well. Snape's presence in his mind was controlled and specific, moving along the edges of Harry's mapped awareness without pushing or pulling, verifying what Harry had described with the care of a surveyor checking a blueprint against an actual building. After 20 minutes, Snape withdrew. He sat back and was silent for a moment with an expression that was, for Snape, remarkably open, the expression of someone whose assessment had been confirmed beyond what they expected. "Your internal mapping is accurate," Snape said. "The Horcrux is exactly where you located it. The anima vinculum impression is," he stopped. Something moved behind his eyes. "It's very strong. Stronger than the theoretical literature would suggest." He was quiet for another moment, and Harry didn't feel it. The fragmentation the Lovegood girl identified, also real. The Horcrux has lost coherence. It's not stable, Potter. It hasn't been stable for some time. Luna said it accelerated after the Department of Mysteries. The veil's proximity would do that, Snape said. Death magic at that concentration would interact with the anima vinculum in ways that, yes. It makes sense. He picked up his tea and then didn't drink it, just held it, which Harry was learning was a Snape habit, something to hold when his hands wanted something to do while his mind was working. The expulsion theory is sound in principle. The practical working will require you to generate the active form of love-based protective magic, the same mechanism your mother used, at sufficient intensity to collapse the Horcrux boundary and force it out. Which means you need to understand what she actually did. Not abstractly. She's been teaching me, Harry said. The portrait. Snape said it without inflection. Yes. Snape set his cup down. I would like, he stopped again, and Harry watched him work through something internal with the efficiency of a man who had long practiced suppressing his own responses. The theoretical framework she's given you about the ancient compact. I want to see the working notes. Harry pulled out his notebook. Slid it across. Snape read it in silence, and Harry watched his face, and there was a moment, a single moment, about 10 pages in, when Snape's hand went very still on the edge of the notebook page, that told Harry exactly which section he'd reached. Lily's description of the magical mechanics of her own sacrifice. The specific choice she'd made in those final seconds, the theoretical structure of it, the way she described her understanding of what she was doing. She knew, Snape said. Very quietly. Exactly what she was doing. Yes, Harry said. Snape finished reading. He closed the notebook and set it on the table between them and looked at it for a moment. 4 sessions, he said. Before you'll be ready to attempt the expulsion working. You need deeper navigational skill, and you need the active compact mechanism to be more than theoretical. He looked up. Can you produce a Patronus under stress? Not in a controlled environment, under actual duress. I cast one in the Department of Mysteries, Harry said. Under conditions that were fairly extreme. And the form? Stag. Something moved in Snape's face. Your father's form, he said. Yes. Snape was quiet for a moment. The Patronus mechanism is related to what we're building. The emotional core of it, the specific memory, the specific quality of feeling, that's the foundation you'll draw on for the active compact working. It needs to be deeper than happy memories. He paused. It needs to be the thing you're most fundamentally unwilling to lose. Harry thought about Ron on a dark staircase, Hermione's handwriting filling 3 pages on his behalf, Neville in a garden with his sleeves rolled up. The portrait room in the early hours of a grey morning. His mother's face, which was his face. I know what it is, Harry said. Good, Snape said. Then we have something to work with. They ran 2 more sessions over the following week, Wednesday evening and the following Saturday, and Harry got faster, the navigation becoming less effort and more reflex, Snape guiding him deeper with the patience of someone who understood that rushing this would break rather than build. On the second Saturday, Snape went deep enough that Harry felt him pause, right at the edge of the warm presence, and withdraw quickly. What? Harry said. The anima vinculum impression, Snape said, and his voice had the quality of someone reporting a fact that is affecting them more than they intend to show. It responded to my presence. Defensively. It perceived me and reacted. Harry blinked. It's still active. Actively protective? Apparently. Snape stood up and walked to the window again, his back to the room position, which Harry understood now as the thing Snape did when he needed a moment to himself. It recognized me, he said, and he said it very quietly, almost not to Harry. I don't know how to explain that. A soul impression recognizing a living person shouldn't be, it's not theoretically supported. Harry thought about what Lily had said. He loved me very much. That was real. She knows who you are, Harry said. She's known for 16 years. She's been living in me, aware of everyone I'm in contact with. Snape stood at the window for a long moment. Then he said, in a voice stripped entirely clean, we'll continue next Wednesday. That was the last purely internal session. Because on the Tuesday between Wednesday sessions, the war moved. Harry woke at 2:30 in the morning with his scar burning at an intensity he hadn't felt since the graveyard, a white, structured pain, not the unfocused throbbing he'd grown up with, but something directional. Something that had a specific source and a specific target. He was out of bed before he was fully conscious, his hand already around his wand, his feet on the floor. Ron's bed was empty. Which made no sense until Harry heard the sound from downstairs, voices, the specific urgent quality of voices in a house that was supposed to be asleep, and underneath it a note of alarm that had a shape he recognized immediately. He was down the stairs and in the kitchen in under 30 seconds. Hermione was there, in her dressing gown, her wand lit. Mrs. Weasley stood at the flue, her face white. Lupin sat at the table with a map spread in front of him that was covered in moving markers, and Ron was behind him, leaning forward, his face carrying a specific expression Harry had seen before, the one Ron wore when something was happening that was bigger than training and theory. What? Harry said. Lupin looked up. Diagon Alley, he said. 2 hours ago. Death Eaters, significant numbers. They've taken Ollivanders and they're holding the upper end of the alley. He paused. There are civilians still inside. The Ministry's response has been chaotic. Fudge, Ron said, with a flat contempt that was nothing like his usual tone. Fudge has been removed, Lupin said. Scrimgeour is the new minister, effective this week. He's more capable, but the transition has left the aura response fragmented. He looked at Harry. Dumbledore is mobilizing the order. He wants, where specifically? Harry said. Lupin blinked. The north end of the alley. Ollivanders, Madame Malkin's, the apothecary, they've created a containment perimeter. How many Death Eaters? We believe 12. Possibly more. Who's confirmed among the hostages? Mr. Ollivander himself, at minimum. And, Lupin paused. Neville and his grandmother were in the alley. Yesterday evening. We've had no contact. Harry went still for 1 second. 1 complete second. Then he turned to Ron. Get dressed, he said. Wand, the shield medallion Hermione made last week, and the communication coins from the DA. Both of you. 3 minutes. Harry, Lupin said. Dumbledore is expecting. I know what Dumbledore is expecting, Harry said. I'm going anyway. With or without order backup. He looked at Lupin steadily. You can come if you want. I'd actually appreciate that. But I'm not waiting for a coordinated order response while Neville is in there. Lupin looked at him, and again, Harry saw it, the recalibration, the almost imperceptible shift in how Lupin was holding the situation. He'd been doing it more frequently over the last 2 weeks, Harry had noticed. Something in Harry's quality had changed in a way that Lupin, who was perceptive and careful, was tracking without yet knowing what to do with it. I'm coming, Lupin said. He folded the map. They operate in 4 separate jumps, Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Lupin, arriving at the entrance of Diagon Alley just as midnight rain was starting to spit from a low, smothered sky. The alley was dark. The usual warm commercial light from the shop windows was absent, replaced by the yellow cast of Ministry containment charms at the far end, visible even at this distance as a sickly glow above the rooftops. A handful of Aurors had set up a cordon at the entrance. Harry walked through it. Oi, one of them started. Harry kept walking. That's Harry Potter, he heard one of them say to another, and he heard the specific quality of the silence that followed, which was the silence of people deciding to let something happen rather than try to stop it. The alley felt different at night and under siege. Every closed shop front seemed to lean inward. The cobblestones were wet and dark and their footsteps were the only sound, until they weren't, until, about halfway up, they caught the faint edge of a sound that wasn't weather. Voices. Controlled, confident, the performance of power by people who felt very certain of their position. Harry made a hand signal at Ron and Hermione that they'd developed over 3 weeks of DA sessions at Grimmauld Place, fan out, 30 feet each side, wait for movement, and they split without speaking, Ron going right, Hermione left, both of them moving with the practiced quiet of people who'd been drilling this. Lupin fell into step with Harry. What are you seeing? He murmured. 12 Death Eaters, they said. Harry moved forward slowly. But if this is designed to draw the order out for a response, if Voldemort wants a visible confrontation at a known magical hub, there might be a secondary group. Hidden. Waiting for the order to commit. Lupin was quiet for a moment. You think this is a trap? I think everything Voldemort does right now is designed to demonstrate to the public that neither the Ministry nor Dumbledore can protect them. A public battle in Diagon Alley, Order members engaging, Ministry Aurors scrambling, it's theater. He paused. The hostages are real, but they're also props. So what do we do? End it fast, Harry said. Before the order arrives in force and turns it into exactly the kind of extended engagement Voldemort wants the press to see. They reached the edge of the Death Eater perimeter. There were 9 of them visible, 9, not 12, which confirmed Harry's guess about a secondary group positioned somewhere else. 3 were stationed outside Ollivander's door, which was forced open, its famous sign dark. 2 more flanked the apothecary. The others moved in a loose patrol pattern, wands loose at their sides, the specific posture of people who expected resistance but weren't worried about it. Harry spent 45 seconds watching the pattern. Timing the intervals, noting the sight lines, identifying the weak points where 2 of the patrol routes left a blind spot. He sent the DA coins warm in his pocket, Hermione and Ron getting the signal, feeling the heat, knowing he was ready. He stepped out of the shadows. "Evening," Harry said. 9 Death Eaters turned. The one at the front was tall, masked, moving with the particular quality of someone senior in Voldemort's ranks. He looked at Harry and the quality of his stillness changed, not fear, but the specific recalibration of someone who has been handed something unexpected and is processing it. "Potter," the Death Eater said. "You have people inside," Harry said. "You're going to let them out." A beat of silence. Then the Death Eater laughed, short and genuine in its contempt. "Is that right? UN," he looked past Harry at Lupin, "a werewolf and whoever you've got hiding in the dark. Are you going to make us?" "Yeah," Harry said. He threw a reductor curse at the door frame of Ollivanders before the Death Eater had finished the sentence, not at any of them, at the frame, and the explosion of wood and plaster hit the 3 Death Eaters in front of the door simultaneously, and in the 3 seconds they were off balance Harry had crossed the distance to the nearest one and cast a body bind with a speed that had nothing to do with luck and everything to do with 3 weeks of Snape-level precision. The next 15 seconds were extraordinary. Hermione came from the left with a string of stunners in sequence, each one aimed and released with a timing that suggested she'd been practicing rapid cast sequences extensively, which she had. Ron came from the right with disarming jinxes linked to impediment curses, which was not standard order training but was something he developed himself during DA practice because, as he'd said, why stun someone when you can take their wand and make them trip over their own feet simultaneously? Lupin moved with a veteran's efficiency, not flashy, absolutely effective. He'd been doing this for 20 years and it showed in the economy of it, the way he neutralized 2 Death Eaters in the apothecary doorway in the time it took most people to cast once. Harry himself moved through the remaining opposition with the specific quality that had started to come through in the last 2 weeks of practice, something that wasn't just trained skill but the result of someone who had spent weeks learning the mechanics of their own magic from the inside out. His casting was clean, fast, and had an accuracy that Snape, watching him on Wednesday evenings, had commented on with the Snape-specific praise of not commenting on at all while slightly leaning forward. The 7 visible Death Eaters were down inside 90 seconds. Into the sudden quiet came the sounds Harry had expected, from above, from the rooftops, where the 3 missing members of the group had positioned themselves. The secondary ambush, launched the moment the main group fell, designed to take out whoever had just fought through the perimeter. Curses came down from 3 directions. Harry had been expecting them. Protego Maxima. The shield that went up was not standard. It wasn't the flat plane of a conventional shield charm, it was spherical, 3-dimensional, wrapping around all 4 of them at once, and it had something in it that hadn't been there before Snape's sessions, before Lily's teaching, before Harry had spent 2 weeks learning what his own magic actually felt like from the inside. The curses hit it and fractured, not just stopped but scattered, their energy dispersed in bursts of light that illuminated the alley in brief, white flashes. Lupin made a sound that was not quite a word. "Rooftops," Harry said, already looking up. "Don't kill them, I want at least one of them to talk." Ron laughed, short, slightly wild, the adrenaline laugh of someone who has been waiting for a real fight for weeks and is now in one and discovering they're better at it than they expected. He turned and fired upward with the specific instinct of someone who had grown up with 6 siblings and understood the geometry of things thrown from above. Hermione hit the second rooftop figure with a Petrificus Totalis from 60 feet at an upward angle, which was a difficult cast under any circumstances, and she did it on the first attempt. Harry crossed the cobblestones in 6 strides, stepped through the forced door of Ollivander's shop, and found them. The shop's interior was dim and chaotic, the famous boxes disturbed, long feather dust everywhere. In the back corner, behind an overturned counter, Ollivander himself, ancient and hollow-eyed and somehow still upright, with 2 fingers pressed to a shallow cut on his forehead. Beside him, with her iron-gray hair half down and her robes singed on one shoulder and her wand drawn with an absolute steadiness that Harry found immediately admirable, was Augusta Longbottom. And beside Augusta, with his wand also drawn and a bruise darkening across his jaw and an expression that was something beyond determination, something that was the product of everything Neville Longbottom had been building in himself for 16 years of being underestimated, was Neville. He looked at Harry. His jaw unclenched slightly. "Took you long enough," Neville said. "Traffic was terrible," Harry said. "Are you hurt?" Grant's shoulders burned. Mr. Ollivander's head. "I'm fine." He paused. There were 12 of them. "We're down to 3, on the rooftops. Ron and Hermione have them." Harry looked at Augusta. "Can you walk?" "I have walked through considerably worse than a singed shoulder," Augusta Longbottom said, in a tone that made Harry think she and McGonagall would get along extremely well. She looked at him with sharp, dark eyes. "You're the Potter boy." "Yes, ma'am." She looked at him for a moment longer. "You fight better than your father did at your age," she said. "He was flashier." "I've heard," Harry said. Something moved in her expression, an assessment passing and landing in a specific place. She offered him a crisp nod, gathered her robes, and walked toward the door with a steadiness that fully backed up her statement about worse situations. Harry helped Ollivander to his feet. The wand maker was shaking slightly, with age or shock or both, and he leaned on Harry's arm with a grip that was stronger than expected. "Mr. Potter," Ollivander said, in that particular voice, thin and rich at once, like old parchment. "I should have found a way to warn you." Harry looked at him. "Warn me about what?" "About what he intends." Ollivander's pale eyes moved to Harry's face, and there was something in them that was specific and weighted. "He's been asking me about wands. About the connection between yours and his. About what it would mean, for the connection to be severed." He paused. "He's looking for another wand. One that won't be affected by priori incantatem." The information landed flat and clear and Harry filed it immediately. "We'll talk about this properly," Harry said. "When you're safe and rested." "Not now." They came out into the alley to find that Ron had brought down the third rooftop Death Eater, somewhat inelegantly, by hitting him with a jellylegs jinx that had made him fall off the roof into a pile of what turned out to be empty crates outside the apothecary, but effectively nonetheless. Hermione had the one sheet Petrificus levitated down. The third was already bound by Lupin. 10 Death Eaters down. 3 up. The alley was no longer quiet. There were sounds from the entrance end, movement, voices, the flo-snap of people arriving. The order was here. Harry could hear Moody's distinctive stamp on the cobblestones, and somewhere behind that a sound that made his jaw tighten slightly, the particular quality of Dumbledore's voice, carrying without effort, speaking to someone at the perimeter. The order rounded the corner of the alley and stopped. Moody took in the scene with his magical eye moving in independent arcs, 12 bound or stunned Death Eaters, 3 hostages free and standing, Harry and his 3 in the middle of it looking entirely settled. The magical eye clicked and whirred. Moody said, which in Moody language contained a considerable amount. Kingsley Shacklebolt, behind him, looked at the scene and then at Harry, and something on his face moved from surprise into something more like recognition. "You got here before us," he said. "We were closer," Harry said. "You took on 12 Death Eaters." 13, Ron said, from behind Harry. "One was hiding in the back room of the apothecary. Hermione got him before we even got to Ollivander's." Hermione, to her credit, did not preen. She did straighten slightly. Dumbledore came through the group of Order members with that particular movement he had, unhurried, making space for himself not through force but through presence. He looked at the scene, and at Harry, and his expression was very controlled, but Harry, watching carefully with the specific attention he developed over the last 3 weeks, could see something underneath the control. It was not the pleased recognition of a plan proceeding correctly. It was the expression of someone watching a variable behave in a way that was outside the parameters of their model. "Harry," Dumbledore said. "You are unhurt." "We're all fine," Harry said. "Ollivander and the Longbottoms need medical attention, minor. I want Ollivander to speak to someone from the Order's intelligence group before he's moved." He has information about Voldemort's current focus that's relevant and urgent. A very short pause. Dumbledore's eyes moved from Harry to Ollivander, to the bound Death Eaters, back to Harry. I see, he said. Also, Harry said, the three on the rooftops, I want at least one interrogated properly, not handed to the Ministry right away. Scrimgeour will make them political before we can learn anything useful. Another pause. Longer this time. You've thought this through, Dumbledore said. While we were working, Harry said. It wasn't complicated. Dumbledore looked at him for a moment with those blue eyes, and Harry looked back, and there was a conversation in the silence of that exchange that was longer and more complex than anything either of them said out loud. Dumbledore saw, Harry knew, exactly what he was looking at, a Harry Potter who had handled a 12-person Death Eater operation without him, who was now standing in the aftermath directing the intelligence response, who had not panicked or deferred or looked for permission. Who was not manageable. The expression on Dumbledore's face was not quite grief and not quite pride and not quite fear. It was all three, in the specific combination they made when the thing you built turns out to have exceeded your blueprints. Very well, Dumbledore said. Kingsley, coordinate with Harry on the intelligence gathering. He turned to address the Order members behind him, and the moment dissolved into the practical business of securing the scene. Kingsley looked at Harry. He was a big man, former Auror, the most quietly capable member of the Order in Harry's assessment. He had the specific quality of people who were excellent at their work and had no particular need to perform it. You knew there would be a secondary group, Kingsley said. It wasn't a question. It made tactical sense, Harry said. Draw the response, trap the responders. Voldemort thinks in layers. He paused. He's going to do it again. Not here, somewhere else, somewhere that tests how the Ministry responds without Dumbledore's direct involvement. He's building a picture of the vulnerability map. Kingsley held his gaze. You've been thinking about this. Obsessively, Harry said. Can we talk? Properly, not in the middle of a field operation. There's information I want to share, and information I need, and I think you might be the right person for both. Kingsley looked at him for another moment. Tomorrow, he said. 7 o'clock. I'll come to Grimmauld Place. Harry nodded. They spent another 2 hours at the scene. Harry answered questions from the Aurors who arrived gradually as the Ministry response organized itself, and he answered them directly and usefully and without drama, which seemed to unsettle several of them in a way they couldn't quite identify. He talked to Ollivander again, more fully, and confirmed what the Wandmaker had said about Voldemort's inquiry. The Elder Wand angle was new information, alarming, and needed to go to Dumbledore directly because whatever else Harry's relationship with Dumbledore had become, Dumbledore knowing about the Elder Wand was better than him not knowing. He told Hermione first. She went very still in the particular way she did when information was arriving that completely recontextualized something she'd already been thinking about. The Elder Wand, she said quietly. If he gets it, Harry said. The wand connection problem disappears, she finished. He could kill you directly. No priori incantatum, no rebounding. Clean. She looked at him. That changes the timeline. It accelerates it, Harry said. He won't wait if he has the wand. He'll come for me. How long do we have? I don't know where the Elder Wand is, Harry said. But if Voldemort's already asking Ollivander about wand connections, he's already looking. He paused. We need the expulsion working finished. We need the other Horcruxes found. We need all of it faster than I planned. Hermione didn't show panic. She was constitutionally incapable of panic in the sense of falling apart. What she did instead was the Hermione version of it, which was her face going very focused and very slightly pale and her hands moving to her bag for her notebook. I'll update the timeline tonight, she said. And I'll write to Flamel again. The expulsion working framework is almost complete. We just need his verification on the active compact mechanism. If he can give us a reading of the theoretical structure. Yes, Harry said. Do that. Neville appeared beside them. He had a rag pressed to the bruise on his jaw and his expression had settled into something that was calmer than the fight's adrenaline but deeper than ordinary calm, the specific settled quality of someone who has just discovered something about themselves that they needed to know. "I held my own in there," Neville said. "Not boastfully. Just factually, the way you stated something real." "You did more than that," Harry said. "You kept Ollivander and your grandmother together and you didn't panic in what must have been a horrible few hours before we got there." He paused. "I need you at Hogwarts. The room of requirement, the DA sessions, you're going to be the one running it when Hermione and I can't be there. Can you do that?" Neville looked at him for a moment. Something passed through his face that was complex and briefly visible, the recognition of being seen, of being given something he'd earned and hadn't known how to ask for. "Yeah," he said. "I can do that." "I know you can," Harry said. Augusta Longbottom appeared at Neville's shoulder, her singed robes exchanged for a borrowed order cloak, her hair repinned with the iron precision of a woman who would not be seen in disarray in a public thoroughfare regardless of circumstances. She looked at Harry with those sharp dark eyes. "My grandson speaks highly of you," she said. "He should speak highly of himself," Harry said. "He was the reason those two didn't panic. That was him, not me." Augusta looked at Neville. Something in her face shifted, not dramatically, she wasn't a dramatic person, but genuinely, the specific shift of a woman who has been seeing someone a certain way for 16 years and is abruptly seeing them differently. She put a hand briefly on Neville's arm. Said nothing. Which was, from Augusta Longbottom, apparently significant, because Neville looked like someone had handed him something he'd waited a long time for. Ron found Harry as they were preparing to leave, appearing at his shoulder with the specific purposefulness of someone who has been waiting for the right moment. "That was different," Ron said. "From what?" "From everything before." He fell into step beside Harry as they moved toward the alley entrance. "In the Ministry last year, in the Triwizard Tournament, all of it. We were always reacting. Running, responding, surviving." He paused. "Tonight we were ahead of it." Harry thought about that. About how it had felt, the moving through the darkness with the plan already in his head, the Death Eaters going down in seconds rather than in the grinding chaos of a reactive fight. The shield going up spherically. The specific feeling of his own magic doing exactly what he asked of it. "Yeah," he said. "It felt good," Ron said. "In a, not happy, exactly, but, right. Like a gear that's been in the wrong position finally finding the right one." He glanced at Harry. "Is that wrong to say?" "No," Harry said. "That's exactly what it felt like." They walked out of Diagon Alley into the rain-damp London street, the four of them, and behind them the Order were still processing the scene, still organizing, still managing the aftermath of a battle that had already been won by the time they arrived. They got back to Grimmauld Place at 4:30 in the morning. Mrs. Weasley was awake, of course she was, and she looked at the four of them coming through the kitchen door with the assessment of a woman counting heads and checking for injuries, and when all four checked out she made that specific sound, somewhere between relief and maternal fury, and began making tea with a force of purpose that communicated several things at once. Harry sat down at the table. He was not tired in the way he'd expected to be. He was tired in his body, muscles, eyes, the post-adrenaline flatness, but there was something else there underneath it, something that was the opposite of hollow. He sat with it and tried to identify it and after a moment realized what it was. It was the feeling of having made a choice and carried it through. Of having moved first, rather than waited. Of having been, for the first time in the war that had defined his entire life, ahead of the thing trying to kill him. Ginny came downstairs at 5 o'clock. She stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the four of them with her tea and their exhaustion and the particular atmosphere of people who had just been somewhere difficult together. Her eyes landed on Harry and she came in and sat down across from him and didn't say anything for a moment. "Diagon Alley," she said. "Yeah. Neville. Safe. His grandmother too." She nodded. She wrapped her hands around a cup of tea someone had put in front of her and looked at Harry with those direct brown eyes. "You fought tonight," she said. "Not a question." 13 Death Eaters, Ron said. "Before the order got there." Ginny looked at her brother and then back at Harry, and her expression was doing something complicated, something that wasn't surprise and wasn't pride and wasn't fear but had elements of all three. "I want in," she said. "You said I was in, but I'm still not in the actual conversations. The planning. What you, Hermione, and Ron are building." She held Harry's gaze steadily. "I know what Voldemort feels like from the inside, Harry. That's not something most people have. You should be using it." Harry looked at her. He thought about the DA in 5th year, Ginny, who had been one of the best of them, whose bat bogey hex could stop most adult wizards cold, who had grown up in a house full of brothers and fights and improvisation. Who had spent a year having Tom Riddle inside her head, who had survived that and come out of it not broken but sharpened. "All right," he said. "Full conversations. Starting today." She nodded once, satisfied, and drank her tea. Harry was upstairs by 6. He sat on the edge of his bed and looked at his hands, steady, as they'd been all night, the steady that came from clarity rather than suppression. He thought about what Ollivander had said. The Elder Wand. The accelerated timeline. He thought about the expulsion working, which was still incomplete. The Horcrux still inside him, changed and fragmenting but still there. The locket and the cup and the Ravenclaw object and Nagini, still out there, still anchoring Voldemort to the world. He thought about Snape, and Wednesday, and the 4th session that was supposed to go deeper than any of the others. He picked up his notebook and opened it to a fresh page and began writing, not theory, not research, but the operational version. What needed to happen, in what order, on what timeline. The war was moving and he was moving faster, and the difference between those two things was everything. He wrote until the house woke up around him, until the smell of Mrs. Weasley's cooking came up through the floors, until London started its morning outside the window, grey and ordinary and completely indifferent to the fact that the shape of the war had just quietly, irrevocably changed. Chapter 6, What the Living Choose. The 4th Acclemency session happened on a Wednesday, 3 days after Diagon Alley, and it was the one that changed everything. Harry arrived at Spinner's End in the early evening, when the canal light was going copper and the narrow street was quiet. Snape opened the door before he knocked, the magical awareness of a spy, always on, never fully off, and stepped back without a word to let him in. The study had changed slightly. There was a third chair, which Harry noted and didn't comment on. A small table with 2 potions vials on it, amber-colored, which Snape identified without being asked as stabilizers, not for performance enhancement, but for grounding, keeping the conscious mind anchored while the deeper work happened. And Snape himself, which Harry had been watching change session by session in the specific way that things change when they're in motion but you're too close to see the increments, slightly less contained than 3 weeks ago, the controls still absolute but deployed differently, less like armor and more like craft. "Today we go to the boundary," Snape said. "Not past it. To it." "I'm ready," Harry said. "You think you're ready," Snape said, which was not dismissal but specification, a meaningful difference. "What happens at the boundary between the Horcrux and the Anima Vinculum will be more disorienting than the navigation work you've done so far. You will feel both presences at full intensity simultaneously. The cold and the warm. You may experience intrusive cognition. Fragments of Voldemort's thought patterns, residual from 16 years of proximity. You may also experience," he stopped very briefly. "The other thing." "My mother," Harry said. "Yes." They sat down facing each other. Snape held his gaze for a moment. "If you feel the Horcrux fragment reaching toward conscious connection, if you feel Voldemort attempting to access the link, which is possible given the boundary work we're doing, pull back immediately and break the session. Don't try to push through it. And if he isn't trying? Then we work," Snape said. "Ready?" Harry closed his eyes. Let himself go inward, the motion easy now, natural as breathing, the descent through the layers of his own mind as familiar as the route from his dormitory to the great hall. The weather regions, the warm solidity of the people he loved, the turbulent places, down through all of it to the deep geography where the two presences waited. He felt Snape enter, a precise, careful presence, walking beside him in the mindscape, his legilimency touch so refined by now that it felt like a guide rather than an intrusion. They moved together toward the boundary. Harry had been close before. Had learned the texture of it, the specific quality of the cold-warm interface. But he had never been this close, close enough to feel them both at full intensity, and he understood immediately what Snape had meant, because it was extraordinary and terrible and overwhelming all at once. The cold was enormous. Not in size but in depth, a depth of wrongness, of the specific absence of everything that made existence bearable, a pit of pure will stripped of all feeling except hunger and contempt. He felt the shape of Voldemort at its source, miles away in some psychic distance, and even that distant contact was nauseating. But the worm was enormous too. Larger than he'd understood from a distance. He'd felt it his whole life as a vague background comfort and had never appreciated its scale because you don't appreciate the scale of the ocean when you've been swimming in it since birth. Now, at the boundary, he could feel it properly for the first time, and it was his mother, all of it, the full weight of what she had done and who she was and what she had felt in that final moment, compressed into a permanent magical impression and woven into him so deeply there was no version of Harry Potter that existed without it. He felt her awareness. Not consciousness, she wasn't conscious in the portrait sense down here, this was older and simpler than that. But awareness, the deep animal awareness of a protective force, something that had been paying attention for 16 years and was paying attention now. He felt it recognized Snape's presence again. Felt the specific response of it, not hostility, not the defensive recoil of last week, but something different this time, something that was the magical equivalent of a door that has been locked for a very long time opening slightly. "She's letting me in," Snape said, from very far away. His voice sounded like it was coming from above the surface of deep water. "I know," Harry said, or thought, the distinction between speaking and thinking collapsed at this depth. "The Horcrux," Snape said. "Look at it directly. Not at the boundary, at the thing itself." Harry looked. It was smaller than it had been. He knew this because Lily had described what it had been when it arrived, a significant fragment, a quarter of Voldemort's remaining soul, catastrophically broken off and lodged in the only living vessel available. What it was now was a fraction of that. Luna had been right, it had been fragmenting for years, and the Diagon Alley night had done something further to it, the sustained high-emotion magic of the battle apparently accelerating the process. It sat in his mindscape like a piece of coal that had been sitting in a furnace for 16 years, still dark and still cold, but significantly smaller than it had started. "The active working," Snape said. "The compact mechanism. Can you feel the anima vinculum from this position?" Harry reached sideways, to the warm presence, and it responded immediately, with a readiness that told him it had been waiting for exactly this. "Yes," he said. "Then do what you know how to do," Snape said. Harry had been preparing for this moment for 4 weeks. Lily had given him the theoretical architecture of it, the specific emotional orientation, the precise quality of intent required, not passive love but active, the kind that chose and acted and gave without the guarantee of return. He had been practicing the Patronus work Snape had identified as the foundation, going deeper than the memory surface into the actual feeling, the thing underneath the thought. He reached for it now. He thought about the morning his Hogwarts letter had arrived and the complete, world-altering fact of being told he was a wizard and that there was a place he belonged. He thought about Ron across a chessboard saying "Don't worry about me" and meaning it with his whole body. He thought about Hermione's face when she believed him, when she sat in the library at 2 in the morning and said "We do this properly." He thought about Neville in his grandmother's garden, ready. Luna at her kitchen table, already knowing. Snape's hand going still on the notebook page when he reached the description of Lily's last moments. He thought about his mother's portrait in the moonlight, the green eyes, the bright fierce smile. He thought about what he wanted. Not abstractly, specifically. He wanted to be alive. He wanted to be at a Weasley Christmas dinner with too many people in too small a room. He wanted to fly on a clear morning with no particular destination. He wanted to sit in the library at night with Hermione talking through impossible problems until something impossible became possible. He wanted to grow up. He wanted ordinary things. He wanted years. He wanted to live. The warm presence ignited. It wasn't dramatic in the external sense, his body sitting in Snape's study showed nothing, Snape reported later, not a flicker. But in the mindscape it was extraordinary, the anima vinculum coming alive as an active force rather than a passive impression, Lily's magical sacrifice activating at the structural level she had designed it for, the ancient compact doing what it had always been capable of doing from the moment it was made, which was being wielded. It hit the Horcrux. The cold presence screamed, not with a voice, with a frequency, a high dissonant vibration that scraped across every surface of Harry's mindscape, and for one terrible second he thought he would lose it, lose his grip on the warm force, lose the orientation, lose everything to the sensory intensity of it. But Snape was there. Snape's legilimency, controlled and precise and utterly steady, functioned in that moment exactly the way a guide rope functions for someone navigating in zero visibility, not carrying him, not rescuing him, just there, the fixed point he could orient around. Harry held on. The anima vinculum closed around the Horcrux fragment like a hand around a piece of ice, and Harry felt something that had no word in any language he knew, the simultaneous sensation of something departing and something returning to him, the space where the cold presence had been filling with a warmth that was different from the anima vinculum warmth, newer and rawer and more fundamentally his own. As though the Horcrux's departure was also the departure of everything it had subtly overlaid on his perception for 16 years, a grey film lifting off a window that had been clouded since birth. Then it was gone. Not with a bang. Not with drama. It simply ceased to be there, and where it had been there was only his own mind, fully his, for the first time in his life. Harry opened his eyes. Snape was sitting very still in the chair across from him, his wand down, his expression doing something Harry had never seen from him, an expression that was stripped of everything professional and habitual, just a face, just a person, looking at something that had affected him. "It's done," Harry said. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. Clearer. Like a recording made in a room where you didn't know there was background noise until it stopped. "It's done," Snape confirmed. He held Harry's gaze. "You're completely clear." Harry sat with that. He pressed his hands to his knees and felt the complete, extraordinary ordinariness of just being himself, just being the thing he had always been but had never been without a passenger. "Where did it go?" he asked. "I don't know," Snape said. "In theory, the expulsion would send it toward its source. Toward Voldemort. A fragment that has been altered by 16 years of contact with a blood magic compact, now forcibly returned to the soul it fragmented from." He paused. "Whether it damages him, weakens him, we can't know without watching for signs." "It will have an effect," Harry said. He knew it with the certainty of someone who had just felt the thing from the inside. The fragment it wasn't the same. It had been changed. Sending it back is like sending back a piece of himself that has been soaking in the thing he's most afraid of for 16 years. Snape's expression shifted slightly. "We'll see." Harry picked up his notebook. "The other Horcruxes," he said. "The locket, the cup, the Ravenclaw object, Nagini. He's still anchored while they exist. The expulsion changes the equation dramatically but it doesn't end it." "You're going with Dumbledore," Snape said. "Yes. Tonight, actually, he asked me 2 days ago to come to Hogwarts. I've agreed. He wants to show me the memory of a man named Slughorn, something about Horcruxes, about the original conversation where Voldemort first asked about creating them." He paused. "I'm also going to tell him the expulsion worked." Snape went very still. "You're going to tell him. He'll find out anyway, the scar will change, my magical signature will register differently to him. He'll notice within a day if I don't say it first. Harry looked at him steadily. And I want to see his face when I tell him. I want to see what he does with the information that his plan no longer applies. Snape looked at him for a long moment. That is either very confident or very foolish. It's both, Harry said. I know which one it's more of. Something moved at the corner of Snape's mouth that had become, over the last 4 weeks, a recognizable quantity. When you go to him, Snape said, watch how he handles the change. Whether he revises the plan or tries to fold your success into the original framework, find a way to make the sacrifice necessary again anyway. He paused. He's intelligent enough to do the latter. I know, Harry said. That's why I'm watching. He operated from the end of Spinner's End Street to the Hogsmeade boundary, arriving in the soft dark of a summer evening with Hogwarts visible in the distance, its towers lit and alive even in the holiday months. He walked the path to the gates and felt the castle's magic meet him the way it always did, that deep, welcome recognition, the feeling of a place that knew him. McGonagall let him in at the gates with a look that was professionally unrevealing but contained, Harry thought, a specific warmth underneath it, the warmth of someone who had been watching him for 5 years and was noting that something had changed. Professor Dumbledore is in his office, she said. He's expecting you. Harry went up. The gargoyle stepped aside without requiring the password. The office was the same as it always was, the silver instruments whirring, the portraits drowsing in their frames, Fawkes on his perch watching Harry with those bright, wise eyes that had always seemed to see more than was comfortable. Dumbledore was standing at the window, his back partially to the door, looking out over the grounds. He turned when Harry came in. Harry, he said, and the warmth was there, the genuine care of it, the quality Harry had stopped reacting to automatically and now simply observed. Thank you for coming. Please, sit down. Harry sat. He looked at Dumbledore. He thought, now. The Horcrux is gone, Harry said. The room changed. Not physically, nothing moved, none of the instruments faltered, Fawkes didn't stir. But the quality of the atmosphere in the room changed the way atmosphere changes before a storm, a pressure shift, something in the air reorganizing itself around a new reality. Dumbledore was very still. He was looking at Harry with an expression that was unlike any Harry had seen from him, and Harry, watching carefully with all the attention he'd been developing for weeks, catalogued it, shock, genuine and deep, the shock of a man whose model of the world has just been violated by an outcome he assigned a near zero probability. Underneath the shock, something more complex, the rapid restructuring of a brilliant mind, working through implications at speed. And underneath that, the thing Harry had told himself he'd watch for, the brief, barely there flicker of something that was trying to find the angle, the adjustment, the way to fold this into a version of the plan that still arrived at Dumbledore's preferred endpoint. He watched Dumbledore find it and this was the moment Harry hadn't entirely expected, he watched Dumbledore decide not to use it. It was visible. The decision. The specific quality of a man choosing not to do the thing he's capable of doing. Dumbledore sat down. He placed both hands flat on the desk in front of him, a gesture Harry had never seen from him, physically grounding, almost human in its ordinariness. He looked at Harry. Tell me how, he said quietly. Harry told him. The framework, the internal navigation, the anima vinculum activation. He didn't mention Snape, not because he was protecting Snape, but because Snape's involvement was Snape's to disclose if and when he chose. He told Dumbledore enough to make the mechanism clear. Dumbledore listened with his complete, formidable attention, and when Harry finished there was a silence that lasted a long time. I didn't look, Dumbledore said. It came out of him as though it had been waiting a long time. For another way. You were right about that. He was quiet. I convinced myself the mathematics of it were settled. That the sacrifice was necessary and fixed, and that looking for alternatives was the kind of self-indulgent hope that gets people killed. He looked at Harry, and his eyes were old, not in the usual sense of vast wisdom and authority, but in the sense of someone who has just seen clearly something they have been not looking at for a very long time. I was wrong. Harry let it be what it was. Yes, he said. You were. Dumbledore held his gaze. You are not going to make this easy for me, he said, and there was something in it that was almost rueful. Almost the human beneath the authority. No, Harry said. But I'll work with you. The external Horcruxes, the ones that are left. I want to finish this. That hasn't changed. He paused. What's changed is who I am when we're done. I'm not the instrument you designed. I'm not the sacrifice. I'm the person who ends this, and then I walk away, and then I live. He held the old man's gaze. Those are the terms. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. The memory I asked you here to see, Dumbledore said. Slughorn's memory, about the Horcruxes, you still need to see it. And there is more, there are things I need to tell you about the Elder Wand. He straightened slightly. Ollivander spoke to you. Yes. Then you know the timeline has changed. Dumbledore's voice shifted back into its working register, the warmth subordinated to the urgent intelligence. Voldemort is searching for the Elder Wand. He believes it will solve the problem of the wand connection between you. He's right that it would. He paused. But the Elder Wand has a specific history and a specific loyalty pattern, and if he acquires it through violence from the wrong person, which he is very likely to do, it will not work as he expects. Where is it? Harry asked. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then, it is currently in my possession. Or rather, it was. I was its master. He held up the blackened hand. The ring Horcrux had a curse on it. When I destroyed the ring, I was cursed. I have perhaps a year. He said it with a flatness that was either acceptance or performance of acceptance, and Harry, even now, couldn't be entirely certain which. The wand passes to whoever defeats its current master. When I die, the wand's allegiance will move. The question is to whom? Harry sat with the implications of that. If Voldemort kills you, he said, he gets the wand's allegiance. But if he doesn't know you're its master, he is looking, Dumbledore said. He's already looking. He will find it. He looked at Harry steadily. Which means there is a specific problem that exists independently of the Horcrux question. The Elder Wand in Voldemort's possession, functioning at full power, is an existential threat even with the Horcruxes destroyed. Then we don't let him get it, Harry said simply. It is not, Dumbledore stopped. There was a beat in which Harry could see him beginning to launch into the specific kind of hedged, complex analysis he used to explain why straightforward solutions were insufficient. He stopped himself. How, he said instead. Harry thought about it for a moment. The wand's allegiance is based on defeating its master, he said. Not killing. Defeating. You told me that in first year, about wand ownership. He paused. So if someone defeats you, non-lethally, before Voldemort kills you, the allegiance has already moved. Voldemort gets the wand but it's already switched. Dumbledore looked at him. That is, yes. That would work in theory. Does it have to be a duel? Harry said. Or does any form of defeat apply? Any form, Dumbledore said slowly. Disarming. Rendering helpless. The wand responds to the power dynamic, not the method. Harry thought about a night in a ruined room at the end of second year, a dark figure and a wand torn away by a disarming charm, and almost said something but didn't, because that particular memory was sharp and specific and required careful handling. We planned that, Harry said. Separately. After the Horcruxes. He looked at Dumbledore. Can you trust me to make that decision when the time comes? Not to tell me what the move is, to let me see the situation and act. Another pause. Longer than the others. Yes, Dumbledore said. It came out simply, without the usual Baroque scaffolding of qualification and condition. Just, yes. Something shifted between them in that moment. Not restored to what it had been was gone, irretrievably, and Harry had no particular desire to get it back. But something different taking shape in the space where the old thing had been. Something that was not trust exactly and not alliance exactly, but was perhaps the beginning of something that could become both, if enough of the other pieces worked out. Harry watched the Slughorn memory that night, standing in the basin of the Pensieve and watching a younger version of the potions teacher lean forward with terrible eagerness and explain what a Horcrux was, how it was made, how many could theoretically be made if one were determined to be thorough. He watched Voldemort, Tom Riddle, young and beautiful and hungry, receive the information with a stillness that was the same stillness Harry had felt in the cold presence inside himself, the same essential quality of a mind that had no warmth in it at all, only will and intelligence and the total absence of anything that prevented the next terrible thing. He stood in the Pensieve and thought, this is what I'm up against. Not a Dark Lord. Not a myth. A choice. A person who chose this, step by deliberate step. And then he thought, so did I, different steps. Different choice. He pulled himself out of the memory. 3 weeks later, they went for the locket. The cave was exactly what Dumbledore had prepared him for and worse in every way that experience always exceeded description. The basin, the potion that Dumbledore had to drink and that cost him in ways he didn't entirely show but that Harry could see, the green-faced pain of it, the fragments of delirious speech, the specific horror of watching someone brilliant and ancient be reduced to a helplessness they couldn't control. Harry made himself do it. Made himself keep pouring the potion into Dumbledore's mouth when he begged Harry to stop. Made himself be the hard thing. The inquiry came. Harry did something he hadn't done in any previous imagining of this scenario, which was light the lake on fire with a firestorm working he'd developed in the room of requirement with Hermione over the previous 2 weeks, not a standard incendio, but a sustained, spreading fire that moved across the water's surface like a living thing, driving the inquiry back not with point source heat but with a wall of it, comprehensive and absolute. The locket was in his pocket. He kept one arm around Dumbledore, who was weakened in a way that Harry found harder to look at than almost anything he'd encountered yet, and he got them both to the boat and across the lake and out. On the long journey back to Hogsmeade, Dumbledore leaning on Harry's arm and moving with the painful care of someone whose reserves had been genuinely depleted, the older man said something very quiet. "I am grateful," Dumbledore said. "That you found another way. That you forced me to see it." He was looking straight ahead. It would have been a waste of you. That's an inadequate word. But it would have been that." Harry didn't say anything for a moment. He thought about 15 months old, and a cupboard under the stairs, and 11 years of being shaped without his knowledge toward an ending that was someone else's design. "It would have been a waste of me," Harry agreed. "And it also would have been wrong. Those are two separate things." Dumbledore was quiet. "Yes," he said. "You're right. They are." They got back to Hogwarts to find it transformed, not under attack, not burning, but thick with people and urgency and the specific smell of fear that gathered when something was coming and everyone knew it. The Death Eaters in the sky confirmed it, the dark mark, vivid green against the night, positioned above the astronomy tower. Harry had been anticipating this since Diagon Alley. He left Dumbledore with McGonagall, the older man's condition alarming enough that there was no argument, and he moved through the castle with a speed and purposefulness that cleared paths in front of him the way a bow wave cleared water. Students pressed against walls. Order members fell into step beside him without being asked. He was aware of Lupin on his left, appearing from a corridor junction, and Tonks on his right, and then Ron and Hermione coming from the direction of Gryffindor Tower because they had the DA coins and knew exactly what the temperature of the coin at this moment meant. "Tower," Harry said. "We know," Ron said. "Death Eaters in the castle," Hermione said. "We've counted 4, Greyback, Amicus and Electo, and at least one more." "The tower's a stage," Harry said, moving. "Whatever's happening up there is designed to be seen. There's something else, there's always something else." He was right, of course. The something else was Draco Malfoy, standing on the tower in the dark with his wand pointed at Dumbledore and his hand shaking and his face wearing the expression of someone who has been given a task that they convinced themselves they could do and are now discovering, in the actual moment, that they cannot. Harry stood at the top of the stairs and took in the scene in 3 seconds. Dumbledore against the wall, blood on his robes, wandless. He'd given his wand to Harry moments before and Harry had it in his left hand alongside his own. Malfoy, wand raised, shaking. And behind Malfoy, descending from the shadows of the tower roof, Snape. Their eyes met. Harry understood, in that moment, everything Snape was going to do and why, and he let it happen, not because he was passive but because he had, over weeks of working sessions and difficult conversations, developed enough of a picture of Severus Snape to know that what was coming next was not betrayal but its opposite. Executed in the only way available to a man who had been playing two sides for 20 years and was finally, in this moment, choosing. Snape moved past Malfoy. The green light of the killing curse lit the tower. Dumbledore fell. In the seconds that followed, while Snape was moving Malfoy toward the stairs, while the Death Eaters below were in controlled chaos, while the castle was screaming in its stones at what had just happened, Harry stood on the tower and felt something that was not grief, or not yet, and was not shock, because he had half expected this, had understood from Snape's face in 3 different quiet rooms over 3 weeks that this specific thing was where the road was going. What he felt was a cold, clean, crystalline understanding. Dumbledore had known this was coming. Not this exact night, but this category of night. Had known that Snape's role would eventually require something irrevocable and public, something that would end his ability to work within Dumbledore's framework. Had, Harry suspected with the specific certainty of someone who had spent weeks learning to read Dumbledore clearly, arranged things so that when the moment came, it would be Snape who did it. It had been the plan within the plan. Even now. Even knowing what Harry knew. Even with the Horcrux gone and the terms changed. Dumbledore had still, somewhere in the architecture of his strategy, included this, Snape's sacrifice, Snape's cover cemented by the most unforgivable act, Snape's ability to return to Voldemort fully trusted now, for whatever purpose Dumbledore needed him to serve next. Harry stood in the night air above a castle that was grieving and thought, he never stopped planning. Not for one day. He adjusted the outer terms and kept the deep structure. And then he thought, Snape chose this. Knowing all of it. Knowing Dumbledore's use of him, knowing the cost, he chose it anyway. Because there was a version of the war's end where Snape's access to Voldemort was the decisive advantage, and Snape had decided that version was worth what it cost. Harry descended the tower. The weeks that followed moved at the pace of something inevitable that was also being actively steered, the difference between a river finding the sea and a river that has been channeled. He went to Hogwarts for 6th year and lived 2 lives simultaneously, cleanly and without much visible effort, the public life, the one Hogwarts expected and Dumbledore had adjusted to, and the private one, the one that was building toward a specific end at a specific pace. The room of requirement on alternate nights, the DA operating at a level that would have been unrecognizable to anyone who'd been there in 5th year. Neville running sessions when Harry couldn't be there, which he did with a quiet authority that had everyone in the room taking him seriously within the first 10 minutes, which was about 7 years overdue. Luna present twice a week, contributing observations that consistently reframed whatever problem the group had been hammering at, consistently turning out to be more structurally useful than they initially appeared. Ginny, who fought like she'd been born to it and had possibly been waiting her entire life to be allowed to fight like that without someone telling her to be careful. Ron, solid and fast and the person Harry trusted most in a tight space, whose chess player's mind had translated into tactical intuition that was becoming genuinely formidable. Hermione, who had written 4 analytical papers worth of theoretical work on the Horcrux network and its vulnerabilities, who had been corresponding with Flamel through her parents' address and had received 3 letters that refined the framework and confirmed the expulsion success with a specificity that was only possible from someone who had, in 6 centuries, seen a lot of magical mechanics that no one else alive had seen. Flamel's final letter said, simply, the fragment returned to Riddle exactly as theorized. I can feel it from here. Something has changed in his magical signature. He is not weaker, but he is less coherent. Tell the boy, the war is already won. It will just take him a little longer to finish it. Harry read that letter 3 times. Then he burned it, methodically, in the small fire he kept going in his corner of the room of requirement, and he went back to work. The locket was destroyed by Ron. Actually, Harry had planned to do it himself, but Ron had insisted with a very specific directness that he got to do one of them, and Harry had handed him the sword of Gryffindor and stood back, and watched Ron look at the thing that rose from the locket's destruction, the terrible silvery shape that wore all 3 of their faces and said all the things Ron had spent 7 years quietly being afraid of, and watched Ron look at it and then, with one expression that was somehow the complete expression of his entire person, bring the sword down. The cup was Hermione, in the Chamber of Secrets with a basilisk fawn, which none of them had expected to be her avenue but which, when Harry thought about it afterward, felt entirely correct. The Ravenclaw diadem required a trip to the room of hidden things and a fire that nobody among the 3 of them set and which appeared to be an old enemy's last desperate act and which Harry ran into and ran out of with the diadem in 3 seconds because he had learned, in the last year, that the window between possible and impossible was sometimes measured in exactly that. Nagini remained. And Voldemort, who was not weakened in a conventional sense but who was, as Flamel had said, less coherent, who had received back a fragment of himself that had been soaking in 16 years of the thing he fundamentally could not process, and who Harry could now feel, through the completely cleared connection of a scar that had no Horcrux driving it, was beginning to feel something he had never felt before and had no framework for. The Battle of Hogwarts happened in May. Harry had been expecting it since November. He had been preparing for it since August. He had walked through the castle in the early mornings for months knowing it was coming and knowing, with a certainty that had nothing to do with prophecy, that it would happen here, where his life had been shaped, where the first friend he'd ever made had offered him half his sandwiches on a train. When it came all at once, the way things that have been held back finally arrive, completely, overwhelmingly, the world reorganizing itself into the version it had been building toward. He fought through it the way he'd been training to fight, not reactively, not surviving, but moving, thinking 3 steps ahead, watching the board. Hermione and Ron beside him, and behind them the DA, and behind them the castle itself, which had its own opinions about what happened within its walls and expressed them through moving staircases and inexplicable door placements and suits of armor that appeared to be operating on independent initiative. Neville, who carved through the battle with a ferocity that surprised everyone who hadn't been watching him for the last year, and surprised no one who had. Luna, who moved through the chaos with complete serenity, as though she were on a leisurely walk, and whose precise, unexpected interventions appeared at exactly the right moments to turn specific fights that would otherwise have gone differently. Ginny, who had to be actively prevented from doing something definitive to Bellatrix Lestrange, and who accepted the prevention with a bad grace that suggested she was simply filing the matter for later. And Snape, who appeared at a critical moment in a corridor on the 2nd floor when 3 Death Eaters had Harry cornered and walked through the fight with a contemptuous efficiency that was not the contempt of Harry's school years but something older and more absolute, the contempt of a man who has been playing a role for 20 years and is no longer required to maintain its surface tensions. He didn't speak to Harry. He just walked through, dealt with the 3 Death Eaters in approximately the time it would take to have a short conversation with someone, and kept walking. Harry let him go. Voldemort came to the courtyard in the small grey hours before dawn. He came the way powerful things came, preceded by silence, attended by his inner circle, wearing the specific quality of someone who believes the outcome is already settled. He looked at Harry across the rubble-scattered courtyard and his eyes, red and slit-pupilled, had the same quality Harry had felt deep in his own mindscape, the hunger, the contempt, the total absence of anything warming. But Harry could see it now, the new thing, the thing Flamel had detected from France and Harry had been feeling through the cleared scar connection for months, a hairline fracture in the certainty. Not fear exactly. Something adjacent to fear, something Voldemort had no word for because he had never experienced it and had therefore never named it. Doubt. The returned fragment had done its work, slowly and thoroughly, in the way that warmth does its work on cold, not dramatically, not all at once, but inexorably. Harry Potter, Voldemort said. Tom, Harry said. The gathered Death Eaters reacted to that, a ripple through them, the specific discomfort of hearing the name, which was the discomfort of people whose leader's power rested partly on the performance of his own transcendence and who were not helped by being reminded he was a person with a person's name. Voldemort's expression hardened. He raised his wand, the Elder Wand, which he had taken from Dumbledore's tomb 3 months ago, which he had cast with for 3 months and found only partially responsive, which had never quite worked as he expected because its allegiance had already moved by the time he acquired it. Harry raised his wand. Tell me something, Harry said, in the specific conversational tone he discovered could do more damage to certain kinds of people than aggression could, because it communicated a fundamental non-deference that those people had no framework for. The fragment you got back. The piece of your soul I was carrying. Did you notice what had happened to it? Voldemort stared at him. 16 years of my mother, Harry said. The love that deflected your curse. That's what your soul fragment has been sitting in since you killed her. And now it's back in you. He held his gaze steadily. How does it feel? Carrying something that spent 16 years in that. The fracture widened. Harry could feel it through the scar connection, through the cleared and direct link between them, the specific wrongness of a mind that had received back something it could not incorporate, something alien to its fundamental structure. Voldemort cast. Harry cast simultaneously. Not a killing curse, something Snape had shown him in the second session at Spinner's End, something from the deep theoretical library of magic that Voldemort had never concerned himself with because it wasn't spectacular enough and because it required understanding that there were forces in magic older and more fundamental than power. It was, structurally, the Expelliarmus mechanism. But at the depth and magnitude that the ancient compact could now generate, Harry actively wielding the full weight of what had been woven into him at 15 months old, the love-based force at its maximum expression, the thing the prophecy had called the power the Dark Lord knew not, wielded not as a passive protection but as an active choice made with every cell of who Harry Potter was. The spells collided in the space between them. No priori incantatem, the Elder Wand's loyalty was Harry's now, had been since the moment in Dumbledore's office months ago when he'd understood the mechanism and made the specific choice that transferred it. The wand in Voldemort's hand was not working for him. Had not been working for him. And Voldemort, whose understanding of magic was brilliant but whose blind spot was exactly this, the thing you couldn't map from outside, the mechanics of love as a structural magical force, had never seen it coming. The Elder Wand flew. Voldemort staggered. And Harry caught the wand, one-handed, the reflex of a seeker, the hand that had caught the snitch 100 times, and stood in the courtyard with 2 wands in his hands and watched the most feared wizard alive take 1 step backward in the grey dawn light. There was a silence. Then Voldemort, Tom Riddle, the boy who had grown up in an orphanage and made a series of choices that had accreted into a monster, looked at Harry Potter with the first expression of genuine uncertainty he had shown in perhaps 40 years. The red eyes had something in them that was almost human. Almost the shape of a person, still there under everything he'd done to himself, in the way a room is still a room even when it's been stripped of everything that made it habitable. The killing curse that had no Horcrux to absorb it and no protection to deflect it rebounded one final time from Harry's shield, the ancient compact active, full, his mother's love wielded by her son, precisely and deliberately, and struck Tom Riddle cleanly, and he fell, simply, and was gone. The silence lasted a long time after that. Harry stood in it. He was aware of people behind him, the survivors, the fighters, the people who had chosen to be here, and he was aware of the ruin around him, and the sky that was going from grey to the very first pale edge of dawn gold, and the specific feeling of being in a world where Voldemort was no longer in it. He was alive. That was the fact he sat with, in the middle of all the other facts. The Horcrux was gone. The Voldemort was gone. The Elder Wand was in his hand, and he turned it once and looked at it, and then broke it cleanly over his knee, because he'd thought carefully about what to do with it and the answer had been obvious. Ron made a sound behind him that was not entirely a word. Hermione appeared at his shoulder. She didn't say anything. She put her hand briefly on his arm, a single, specific contact, the kind that communicated more in its brevity than a speech could, and stood beside him and looked at the same dawn he was looking at. "We're alive," Harry said. "We are," Hermione said. Astoundingly. Ron came up on his other side, slightly disheveled, with dried blood on his knuckles that was not his own and an expression that had several layers to it. "You broke the Elder Wand," he said. "Yes. The most powerful wand in the world." "Yes." Ron looked at the pieces in Harry's hand. "Right," he said, and if there was something underneath it that wasn't entirely reconciled, he tucked it down with the ease of a person who has made their peace with the gap between how things could be and how things should be. "Right. Okay." Later, weeks later, when the immediate world was somewhat less on fire, Harry went back to Grimmauld Place one last time. Not to stay. Just to close something properly. He walked the familiar route upstairs, past the drawing room, down the corridor where the boards still creaked in the same places, to the small room at the back of the second floor. The door opened easily. Lily's portrait was lit by midday sun, which was different from moonlight but equally particular, warm and direct, the portrait rendered in gold and green and the specific shade of red that Harry now recognized in himself when morning light caught certain angles. "You did it," Lily said. "We did it," Harry said. He sat down on the floor out of habit, which made her smile. "All of us." Ron destroyed the locket. Hermione destroyed the cup. Neville killed Nagini, it turned out. With the sword, in the middle of everything. Nobody told him to. He just saw the moment and took it. "Of course he did," Lily said. "He'd been ready for years." Harry nodded. He looked at his hands. The scar on his forehead was still there, would always be there, he supposed, a record of a specific night, the night he'd started, though he hadn't known it at the time. But it was quiet. Just a scar now. Just the mark of something survived. "He's gone," Harry said. "Completely. All the anchors destroyed, the Elder Wand broken, no way back." "I know," Lily said softly. "I felt it. Something lifted." She paused. "Even here." Harry looked at her. The portrait, the magical construct, the grief-driven artifact of a grandfather who had wanted something of his daughter left behind in a world that was too dangerous to hold her. "What happens to you?" he asked. "Now." "I'll stay here," Lily said. "Portraits don't go anywhere. I'll be here as long as the house is standing, which given the enchantments on it should be quite a long time." She tilted her head. "You could come back. When you need to. Or just when you want to." "I will," Harry said. He meant it. "Harry." Her voice was quiet and direct. "You chose to live. When it mattered. When you could have walked into it the way Dumbledore needed you to. You chose differently." "You told me to," he said. "I told you to fight smart and want your life," Lily said. "I didn't tell you how to do any of the rest of it. That was yours." She held his gaze. "That was always yours." Harry sat with that for a moment. The room was warm in the midday sun. The house was quiet around him, that particular Grimmauld Place quiet that he would always associate with late nights and hard truths and the feeling of something locked discovering that it had the key inside it all along. "I'm going to Hogwarts in September," he said. "Finishing my newts properly. Hermione's insisting." "Good. Ron's coming too. Under protest, but he's coming. Also good. And after that," he stopped. "I don't know yet. That's the thing I keep coming back to. I've been so focused on this specific end that I've never seriously thought about what comes after, because there wasn't supposed to be an after." Lily smiled, and it was the brightest version, the one that was his smile from the mirror. "That," she said, "is a genuinely wonderful problem to have." Harry looked at her. His mother, who had been dead for 15 years and was somehow still here, in the way that people who love enough remain in the things they leave behind. His mother, who had been the first and most fundamental lesson of everything, that love was not a feeling only but a force, not passive warmth but active choosing, not the comfort of being kept but the fire of being willing to be destroyed for someone else's survival, and the deep structural magic that act left in the world long after the act was done. He stood up. Dusted his hands off on his jeans. "I'll come back," he said. "I know," Lily said. "Go on, then." He walked out of the room and left the door open behind him, and went down through the house that no longer felt like held breath or old grief but like a place that had simply been waiting for its business to be finished, and out into the summer street where the world was continuing in its bright, indifferent, extraordinary way, and Harry Potter walked into it, not carefully, not quietly, not as someone else's instrument or anyone's sacrifice, but as himself, on his own terms, in a life he had chosen to have.